Chapter 144. In the past 18 years of Lu Buwang's life, he had never interacted with a woman except for his little junior sister. Even his little junior sister was gentle and polite. He had never seen such a fierce weirdo. His senior brother said that he was pure and honest, which was true. He put on airs, but he was repeatedly helpless against Mu Hongjin. He couldn't get rid of Mu Hongjin, so he thought that he would wait until he finished his business and then take her to Qian Mountain. As for how to deal with her, he would let Taoist Yunji decide. Suddenly, there was a gentle and soft girl beside him, which made Lu Buwang very uncomfortable. But soon, this discomfort was diluted by anger. Mu Hongjin wasn't like what she said. I don't eat much, and I won't spend much of your money. I won't be a problem if you take me with you. Mu Hongjin indeed didn't eat much, but she spent a lot of money. She was too picky. She had to choose the best restaurant to eat, dress beautifully, and live in an inn. Fortunately, she had her own money, which was very rich, so she could afford it. Not only that, but she also shared it with him generously. Young hero, the roast duck of Wu Fonglu is really delicious. Try some. Lu Buwang frowned and looked at her. Didn't you say that you were abducted? How can you have so much money on you? When the abductor abducted you, he must have been so kind that he didn't search you, right? Mu Hongjin was stunned and said apologetically, You found out. Well, in fact, I wasn't abducted here. She leaned close to Lu Buwang and whispered in his ear, I ran away from my marriage. Lu Buwang looked at her in surprise. It's true. I didn't lie to you. My father wants to marry me to an old man who is older than him. Look at me. I'm so young and beautiful. How can I marry into a tiger's den? I heard that the man is a pervert. He had married 3 wives before, but they were all tortured to death by him. I had no choice. She pretended to cry and covered her face with her sleeve. I just didn't want to die so miserably. Lu Buwang was skeptical. Nonsense. Since you have so much money on you, it can be seen that your family background is not bad. Why did your father marry you to such a person? That person's family background is even bigger than ours. Mu Hongjin said aggrievedly. Don't you know that the higher the official's rank, the higher the official's rank? He took a fancy to me and wanted me to be his wife. My father had no choice, but I didn't want to. I escaped in the middle of the night. If they caught me, I would be dead. So, young hero, please don't leave me behind. Lu Buwang said angrily. I'm not your husband. She made it sound as if he had abandoned her. They were strangers he had met by chance. If her family really found Mu Hongjin and they wanted to take her away, what reason did he have to stop them? That won't do. Mu Hongjin grabbed his hand. You saved me, so you should be responsible for me. If you leave me behind halfway, I'll die sooner or later. It's better to die now. Come on. She snatched the long sword from Lu Buwang's waist and put it on the table. She looked at Lu Buwang and said aggressively, It's better to die under your sword than to be tortured by that bastard. Young hero, kill me. There were people coming and going around. When some people saw them like this, they all pointed at them. Lu Buwang immediately blushed and said angrily, What nonsense are you talking about? If you don't promise to protect me all the time, I'll always be like this. The young man was instantly overwhelmed. How could there be such an unreasonable woman in the world? However, she had said everything, and he couldn't even refute her. After a while, he was defeated. He gritted his teeth and said, I promise you, forget it. It would only take more than a month to gain experience at the foot of the mountain. After more than a month, he would take her back to Qian Mountain. Taoist Yunji had his own way. At that time, no matter how arrogant this woman was, they wouldn't meet again. Hearing this, Mu Hongjin immediately smiled. She suddenly approached him, looked at his face, and said, Actually, there is another way. As long as I get married now, that rotten old man won't be able to do anything to me. I see that you're handsome and your swordsmanship is outstanding. You're even better than that person. Why don't you marry me and we'll both be happy? The girl smiled lightly, and her eyes were as moist as a mountain stream, clearly reflecting his figure. The young man in white was startled. He jumped up as if he had been bitten by a snake and reprimanded. Who wants to be happy with you? Oh, Mu Hongjin spread out her hands regretfully. That's a pity. That's a pity. Suddenly, there was a clang sound beside his hand, and he came back to his senses. He didn't know when his fingertips had accidentally touched the strings on the table, shattering his memories. He was stunned for a moment, and the clear and cunning voice of the girl back then seemed to appear in his mind. She kept calling him young hero, which made him impatient and upset. After a while, Lu Buwang lowered his head and smiled faintly. They were all gone and couldn't be chased. It was just adding to his sadness. He also had something on his mind because he met Mu Hongjin in the prince's mansion during the day. That night, he didn't sleep well. He tossed and turned in bed and didn't fall asleep until the middle of the night. Fortunately, he didn't wake up Xiao Ju. Because he slept late at night, he woke up a little later the next day. When he woke up, he didn't see Xiao Ju. Han Xiao smiled and said, "Young master went out early in the morning and told me not to wake madam up." He Yin said, "Oh," and asked Han Xiao, "Did he say where he was going?" Han Xiao shook her head. He Yin got up and washed up. After eating, he walked to the courtyard and saw Lu Buwang making tea. Lin Shuanghe was sitting on the side and admiring. "Master." He Yin went over and called, "He." Lu Buwang smiled and said, "Do you want to drink tea?" "No." He Yin waved his hand repeatedly. Lu Buwang's skill in making tea looked quite intimidating, but the tea he made had always been very bitter, similar to medicine. Although she wasn't afraid of suffering, she wasn't someone who would ask for it. She immediately said, "I'm going out for a walk. You guys continue." He Yin smiled and walked away. When she arrived at Jiang, if it wasn't for something, her days would be very boring. If it was in the past, she would have practiced martial arts to strengthen her body on such a good morning and good weather. Unfortunately, she was wearing women's clothes now, so it wasn't convenient for her to do this. She was even more afraid of being exposed. After thinking about it, she could only give up. While she was regretting, Cui Jiao hurried over and said, "Madam, a guest is here." "If there's a guest, then so be it." He Yin was puzzled. What does it have to do with me? She wasn't the owner of the Cui mansion. She was obviously a guest. Even if there was a guest, it wasn't He Yan's turn to welcome her. "No." Cui Jiao carefully looked at her face. "You know this guest. She's the daughter of Ling Dianyi from the Dibua Hall. She came to the mansion today and said that she came to have fun with you." He Yin was puzzled. Ling Xiao? Was she very close to Ling Xiao? They didn't even talk much. Their relationship wasn't close enough for them to visit each other, right? "Madam, do you want to go and take a look?" He Yin sighed. She had already come to the house. How could he close the door and not meet her? Forget it. He would just go and meet her for a while and see what she was up to. In the small garden, several young girls were sitting together. They were all dressed up and were beautiful. They were even more beautiful than the spring scenery in the garden. They were chattering and laughing, and their voices were like orioles. Just looking at them was really pleasing to the eye. Concubine Wei stood in the corridor and wrung her handkerchief angrily. She said, "These people are really too much. They're bullying our Yuyan." Second concubine Wei was putting nail polish on her fingers. The bright red color of the nail polish made her fingers look especially slender and white. "It can't be helped. Who told young Master Qiao to be so handsome? Our Jiang hasn't had such a person for many years. His age is just right. If I were 10 years younger, I would also give it a try." "Try my ass." Concubine Wei was so anxious that she cursed. "Be careful, or I'll tell Master." "Good sister, I was just saying, why did you take it seriously?" Second concubine Wei laughed. She carefully looked at the nail polish on her fingers under the sunlight. "There are so many wolves chasing after a piece of meat. I'm too lazy to deal with them. Miss Yin is so pitiful." Third concubine Wei liked to be sad. She covered her heart with her handkerchief and sighed with a frown. She said with some empathy, "So many people have their eyes on her as soon as she arrived in Jiang. If she continues to stay in Jiang in the future, will her days be good? Although she is young and beautiful now, if other women were to appear in front of young Master Qiao every day, how long would young Master Qiao be able to last?" A man's true feelings are too easily changed. They can't withstand a few words from a vixen. Who are you scolding? Second concubine Wei glanced at her. Do you dare to say that in front of master? Third concubine Wei pretended not to hear her and wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. Fourth concubine Wei was the youngest and used to be a street performer. She always laughed heartlessly and asked while eating melon seeds. That depends on whether young Master Qiao likes his wife or not. I quite like Miss Yuyin. She doesn't have the delicate air of a young miss. Last time, she even helped my servant carry the bucket. It was the first time I saw a master helping a servant. How nice. That's terrible. Third concubine Wei made a fuss over nothing. Men all like gentle and timid girls. Carrying a bucket, she didn't let others look down on her and think that she was born to be treated carelessly. Fourth concubine Wei was dissatisfied and spat out the melon seed in her mouth. What do you mean look down on me? I used to be a street performer and carried 5 water vats at a time. Master still liked me very much. What gentle and timid. Master didn't have the patience to deal with someone like you, who would have a headache and fever every few days. Enough, stop arguing. Concubine Wei's head hurt from their argument, and she reprimanded them. We are talking about Miss Yuyin now. In any case, she is quite miserable. Third concubine Wei muttered. You see, Miss Ling isn't easy to deal with. The other girls aren't that easy to deal with either. Young Master Qiao is born beautiful, but he treats people very coldly. I don't think he cares much about Miss Yuyin. Sooner or later, something will happen. Third younger sister. Second concubine Wei glanced at third concubine Wei. Do you know why you are the least favored among the 4 of us? It's because you don't have good taste. Third concubine Wei glared at her angrily. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked like she was about to cry again. That young Master Qiao's temperament is indeed cold, and he doesn't seem to care much about Madame Qiao. I don't know why. Perhaps there were no feelings before marriage? However, from his behavior these past few days, it's clear that he likes Madame Qiao. Ordinary people's love isn't a big deal, but this kind of person's love is. There is a kind of person who is unmoved, but once he is moved, there is only one person in his eyes. Second concubine Wei raised her finger and smiled like a vixen imparting her experience. No matter how many other girls are beautiful, they are all in vain in his eyes. Qiao Huanqing is this kind of person. When these words came out, everyone was silent for a moment. This kind of man was probably what women yearned for. For a moment, they were speechless. After a long while, concubine Wei opened her mouth and asked, Do you mean that we don't have to help? Help what? Second concubine Wei smiled carelessly. That Xiao Huanqing is very protective. Why don't we make a bet? I'm afraid that when Yu Yin's husband will stand up for her before she is in trouble. When Yu Yin arrived at the small garden, a gust of fragrant wind hit him in the face, and he almost fainted from the smell. He didn't know why the women of Jiang liked to wear fragrant pouches so much. It was fine if it was just one person, but when many people crowded together, it was like a cloud of powder. For a moment, he and Miss Xiaoju's moon-chilling fragrance very much. It was faint and light. It was just right. Madame Qiao is here. Ling Xiao stood up and smiled at her. He didn't know any of these girls except for Ling Xiao and Yin Min. He thought for a moment and said, I heard that Miss Ling specially came to see me. You don't have to be so serious. Ling Xiao smiled and said, It's just that today's weather is good and we have nothing to do. We are sitting together and chatting. We thought that since Madame Qiao is here, we might as well go together. Madame Qiao won't find us disturbing, right? I won't. Yin smiled and snorted in her heart. Even though she wasn't sensitive to women's affairs, she could tell that this group of people had ulterior motives. They weren't here to see her. They were clearly here to see Xiaoju. As expected, Ling Xiao's next sentence was, Why don't I see young Master Qiao? My husband went out early in the morning. Yin smiled very amiably. He might not be back until late at night. What right did they have to see him whenever they wanted? He was the commander-in-chief of the right corps of Dewei. Of course, he couldn't just let anyone see him. If he didn't allow them to see him, then he didn't allow them to see him. When Ling Xiao and the girls behind her heard this, they instantly looked disappointed. Yin smiled and said, Didn't Miss Ling specially come to see me? Why? You're not joking, right? How can that be? Ling Xiao regained her senses and affectionately pulled He Yan's hand and sat down at the stone table in the courtyard. Quickly sit down. My father and official Chui have a very good relationship. In the past, I often came to the Chui residence to play. However, I never had a sister, and it was rather lonely. It's good that Madame Xiao is here. In the future, when Ah Xiao comes to the Chui residence again, I don't have to worry about not having someone to talk to. Yan thought to herself, how is this looking for a sister? She's obviously here to see a handsome man. Xiao Ju should come and see what she meant by being more serious and deceiving than her. Yan sat down in front of the stone table. To be honest, she didn't know these people at all and didn't know what to say. She just casually picked up some fruits to eat and planned to sit here as a decoration and listen to them talk. Unfortunately, since the other party was here for Xiao Ju and Xiao Ju wasn't here, this madam couldn't possibly be spared. As they spoke, the topic of conversation landed on He Yan. I heard that Madame Xiao is a famous talented woman in Hu province. Previously, I really wanted to hear Madame Xiao play the guqin. Unfortunately, I was stopped by Sir Qiao in the end. Now that I think about it, I feel regretful, Ling Xiao said with a smile. He Yan smiled and said, what's there to feel regretful about? Didn't my husband also play a piece? But Sir Qiao said that his guqin skills weren't even 1/10 of Madame's. Ling Xiao stared into He Yan's eyes. It's really hard to imagine. Yes, it was really hard to imagine. He Yan thought to herself, Xiao Ju's lie was a little too exaggerated. Now that she heard it from someone else, she felt embarrassed. My husband's praise is a little too much. He Yan poured herself a cup of tea and took a sip. My guqin skills are about the same as his. If you listen to him, it's equivalent to listening to me. How can that be? Ling Xiao obviously didn't plan to let her off so easily. In Jiang, we admire talented people the most. Since Madame has the talent to swallow the phoenix, you shouldn't hide it. The weather is good today. Why don't we pick up some poems here? Firstly, it's interesting. Secondly, we can see Madame's talent. Here it comes, here it comes. Ian was annoyed. Why did Ling Xiao ask him to either play the guqin or compose poems? Did she have to play chess or write calligraphy if she said that she didn't know how to compose poems? Ian thought to himself, even if this lady is attracted by Xiao Ju's appearance and admires her, she should be targeting Xiao Ju. For example, she should be showing off her skills in front of Xiao Ju. Why is she making things difficult for me? Is it possible that Xiao Ju will like anyone who makes things difficult for me? Once was fine, but every time was the same. Ian didn't want to play this kind of game with them anymore. He only smiled and said, today I don't want to compose a poem, nor do I want to play chess. Of course, I definitely won't play the zither. There was no room for negotiation at all. He directly rejected Ling Xiao. No matter how clever Ling Xiao was, she didn't expect He Yan to say that. After a while, Yan Min who had been silent all this time, snorted and mocked. It said that women in the Central Plains are graceful and polite. I think Madame Qiao's way of speaking is like our Miss Jiang. Very straightforward. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. He Yan smiled. Madame Qiao, are you looking down on us? Ling Xiao lowered her head and asked uneasily. It's not that I'm looking down on you, He Yan said doubtfully. It's just that I don't want it today. Didn't you say that Miss Ling is a talented lady? Why can't you understand a simple sentence? Is it difficult to understand what I said? He Yan would have asked them to come out and fight if they were men looking for trouble today. However, it was not good for a woman to do such ungentlemanly things. After thinking about it, she decided that it would be better to use the title of evil Rakshasa to make these ladies understand that she was not to be trifled with. After being frightened, they would naturally not come to her door and ask her to play the guqin, chess, calligraphy, and painting again. Ling Xiao looked at her in a daze and did not say anything. When the other ladies saw this, they were dissatisfied with He Yan. It was probably because Ling Xiao was very prestigious among them. When Ling Xiao was wronged, all of them wanted to stand up for her. A lady with a slightly louder voice said, Madame Qiao refuses to do this and refuses to do that. Could it be that she doesn't know how to play the guqin? The so-called title of a talented lady doesn't live up to its name. That's why she shirks it every time. How is that possible? Another lady seemed to be deliberately playing along with her. She said in surprise, "That young Master Qiao is not an ordinary person. He plays the guqin so well. It's obvious that he's an elegant person. He was already very wealthy in the past. Now that he's acknowledged his ancestors, he'll be a person of status in Jiang sooner or later. I heard that Madame Qiao is also from an ordinary family. If she doesn't have any special skills, what is young Master Qiao like about her?" Yan Min smiled insincerely and said, "Beauty. Speaking of which, Madame Qiao's skin is as white as jade. She's as beautiful as the moon." She emphasized the word skin as white as jade. He Yan was speechless. She seemed to be talking about Xiao Ju. How could she be blamed for that? What kind of logic was that? Beautiful as the moon. There are so many beautiful ladies in Jiang. Isn't Xiao beautiful? She comes from a good family, has a gentle personality, and is brimming with talent. If that's the case, Xiao is the one who's compatible with young Master Qiao. "Don't talk nonsense," Ling Xiao said with reddened eyes. Yan had finally experienced how bold Miss Jiang was and how direct she was with her words. But what did they mean by this? Ling Xiao was a pure and innocent lady. Xiao Ju was now a married man. Did they want her to be Xiao Ju's concubine? Or did they want her to step down to make way for Ling Xiao? Was there something wrong with her brain? "We didn't say anything wrong. Madame Qiao, you won't be liked by your husband sooner or later." The lady with the loudest voice laughed and said, "Madame Qiao, please don't blame us for not being nice with our words. We're only saying this because we treat you as our own. Don't treat us as outsiders." Oh, since they couldn't do it openly, they were trying to sow discord? Yan had been with Xiao Ju for a long time and had learned a thing or two about his ability to scold people without using any vulgarities. He immediately shook his head and smiled sweetly. "Don't treat us as outsiders. Don't treat us as outsiders. I know that all of you have good intentions. However, you're worrying too much. My husband treats me very well. Even if I don't know how to play the zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting, he wouldn't blame me at all, let alone if I didn't know how to play the zither. I have a bad temper, and I get angry and ignore people easily. My husband, on the other hand, would always be patient and coax me. He would cook noodles for me and take me to buy noodles. He would remember every word I said. He even remembers things like menstruation better than I do." Yan glanced at Ling Xiao and saw that Ling Xiao's expression was not good. He felt proud and spouted more nonsense. "What's so difficult about learning the zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting? When I'm unhappy, my husband will use his skills to make me happy. What you've seen is just the tip of the iceberg. There are many more that you haven't seen." Outside the courtyard, Xiao Ju had not reached the garden. She had just turned the corner when she heard Yan's pretentious sigh. He used a disgusting and sickening tone to speak. "Sigh. Such an outstanding and unreasonable man only dotes on me. He can't tolerate anyone else in his eyes. What can I do?" Chapter 145. Fei Nu, who was behind her, was speechless. Xiao Ju felt her eyebrows twitching. She had just returned to the Chui residence and had not had time to change her clothes when she heard from Chui Jiao that Yan was dragged to the small garden by Ling Xiao. She knew what a woman like Ling Xiao was up to. However, Yan did not know anything about women. She thought about it and decided to put out the fire first because she was afraid that Ling Xiao would be taken advantage of. Who knew that as soon as she arrived, she would see Ling Xiao so proud of herself and did not seem to be taken advantage of. The other women were so angry that their faces turned green. She wasn't too stupid. Xiao Ju was both angry and amused, so she didn't go forward. She simply stood at the corner of the garden and looked at her coldly. She wanted to hear what other shocking, crazy things this person could say. On the other side, Second Yang showed a knowing smile. She pointed at the figure at the corner of the garden and said, "Look, someone is here to protect her." "It's true." Fourth Yang clenched her fists and said, "Second sister, you are so good at judging people. I admire you." It's hard to say who he will help. Third Yang was not satisfied with her wrong judgment and said, "What if Qiao Gongzi sees Ling Xiao's beauty and changes sides?" Yang Wei frowned and said, If you don't know how to speak, then don't speak. Second Inyang laughed and schadenfreude. On the other side, Hien was still speaking with assurance. That's why I said to my sisters, you must learn the 4 arts of zither: chess, calligraphy, and painting. However, you must learn them to make yourself happy. If you only want to make a man like you, then you should learn how to control your husband. Before I was married, I was also very fond of romance. However, after I got married, I felt that everything was just fleeting clouds in the valley. Only the trick of controlling a husband is truly powerful. Really? This group of girls was not too old. Although they were a little annoying at times, they were not so scheming. Since they could write their thoughts on their faces, they were naturally not scheming. One of the girls asked, "Then tell us, what is your secret to controlling your husband?" Hien coughed and said seriously, "I'm ashamed to say that I do not know what my technique of controlling my husband is. Back then, I only met my husband once at the Lantern Festival. I didn't even know him. The next day, he came to propose marriage and said that he would marry no one but me. Actually, I didn't want to get married so early, but he was so infatuated that he told me he wouldn't marry anyone but me. If I didn't agree to marry him, he would commit suicide by jumping into the river. I thought that since it was a human life, I might as well do a good deed. Moreover, you also know a saying, a strong woman is afraid of a pestering man. He kept pestering me, so I married him. I've thought about it. There's only one trick to controlling a husband. First of all, you have to have a face that can make people infatuated at first sight and want to marry no one else but you." She combed her long hair that hung in front of her chest and said somewhat embarrassedly, "Of course, this is not something that everyone can do. Secondly, you must like him less than he likes you." Men and women were generally evenly matched. In small matters, there would always be someone who had the upper hand and someone who was at a disadvantage. This is just like fighting a war. It's not a good thing to always place too much importance on your lover. If you treat yourself well, there will naturally be someone who will love you. Hien made up such nonsense that she almost believed herself. I've never fawned on my husband, but he doted on me like a pearl or a treasure. This is the result. Thirdly, Hien said in her heart, I can't make up the third one. She smiled slightly. Good people are rare. Everyone has to open their eyes and look carefully. Rather than staring at someone else's, it's better to open your eyes and raise a new one. Fei Nu secretly glanced at her master. Second young Master Xiao was leaning against the wall. His smile was slightly cold, and his eyes were filled with ridicule. Fei Nu thought, this lady, he said something about a strong woman being afraid of a pestering man. Their young master is a pestering man, and he kept pestering her? He really knew how to flatter himself. Second Inyang stopped cracking melon seeds and stared at Hien. She said in surprise, "So it was me who made a mistake? I thought he was someone who didn't know about the inner courtyard. I didn't expect him to be an expert." Wonderful. Although I don't quite understand what she said, Fourth Inyang scratched her head. It sounds very impressive. Hien's heart calmed down a little. He felt that since he was reborn, he had seen a lot of the world with Xiao Ju. He had even learned a lot about talking to people and talking to ghosts. Of course, this nonsense right now was enough to scare these little girls into a daze. However, in a group of people, there were always one or two who were not easy to fool. Yen Min looked at her and said sarcastically, "Do you really think that people will believe what you said? Young Master Qiao dotes on someone and pesters you? Does young Master Qiao look like this kind of person?" When she said this, the few young ladies who were still in a daze recalled Qiao Huanqing's cold appearance and immediately became clear-headed. No matter how they looked at it, Qiao Huanqing didn't look like the kind of person who would pester Wen Yuyan. "You must be lying," the loud-voiced young lady said. "I'm not." Hien was very sincere. "Our relationship as husband and wife is very good, so good that it's beyond your imagination. Just a few days ago, during the Water God Festival, we even walked on Lover's Bridge. I'm afraid of heights and didn't want to go at first. However, when my husband heard that people who cross the bridge together will not be separated for the rest of their lives, he forcefully carried me over. If I hadn't sternly refused, he might have had to walk on it 3 times, destined for 3 lifetimes. Xiao Ju," He couldn't bear to continue listening. He only felt that it was inconceivable. How could there be such a person in the world who could tell such a lie without blushing or panting? She was so serious that it made one's hair stand on end. What's wrong with that? The young lady at the side was unconvinced. So many people walk on Lover's Bridge. We even look at pictures together, Yin said. Ling Xiao didn't understand. What pictures? Spring. Before she finished speaking, a light cough was heard. Everyone turned to look and saw a young man slowly walking over. He was so elegant that he could be in a painting and was as handsome as jade. It wasn't the first time they had seen him, but every time they saw him, they couldn't help but be mesmerized by this person's appearance and praise him in their hearts. When he passed by Yin, his beautiful eyes fell on Yin, revealing a hint of warning. Yin also forgot what he was talking about. Just as he was about to speak, he heard Xiao Zhu say faintly, Yin, what are you doing here? Yin? Ling Xiao was stunned. It wasn't uncommon for couples to call each other Xiao, but it was always done in private, in front of everyone, unless their love was so strong that they didn't have any taboos. Yan's breath was stuck in his chest, and he didn't know what to say. Although he knew that Xiao Zhu was calling Wen Yuyin's Yin, it was such a coincidence that she also had a yin. Thinking about it this way, he seemed to be calling her Yin. She replied blankly, just drinking tea and chatting. Xiao Zhu nodded and stared at her with a pair of sparkling black eyes. He smiled slightly and said in a gentle voice that made her heart tremble, Can you accompany me back to the room to sit? Sit for what? Yin was extremely unaccustomed to him speaking like this. She only felt that the surrounding gazes were like knives, flying towards her. It was really depressing. Just now, she was here bragging about how favored she was, but in return, she only got a liar. Moreover, Xiao Zhu didn't say much. He only put a gentle gaze on her, and she received so many jealous gazes. Who wouldn't say that second young Master Xiao was amazing? Play the zither with me. The young man's face was as beautiful as jade, and his eyes were as bright as the stars. His hair was soft and cold, and it hung on his shoulders. He reached out and gently rubbed Yan's hair. He really doted on her. The people around them wanted to push Yin away and stuff their heads under the young man's hand. Oh, okay. Yin composed herself and stood up. When she looked up again, she also had a shy expression. Sisters, I'm sorry. My husband wants me to go back and play the zither with him. She sighed again and said with annoyance, It's true that a fierce woman is afraid of a pestering man. Yin turned around and leisurely walked away with Xiao Zhu. The people behind them looked at each other. After a while, Ling Xiao flung her handkerchief, gritted her teeth, and wiped her face. Yin Min was startled. What's wrong? Ling Xiao was so angry that she cried. The plate of melon seeds was empty. Fourth concubine clapped her hands and said with dissatisfaction, That's it. If you want to watch, go find a book. Concubine Wei rebuked. Do you think young Master Qiao is here for you to watch a show? Don't say, This is much better than the show in the lovesickness class. Second concubine rested her chin on one hand, watching from afar when young Master Qiao protected his wife. It was quite moving. Watching it made me want to... What are you thinking? Concubine Wei said, Don't cause trouble for me. Good sister, I'm just saying. Second concubine smiled flirtatiously. At our age, even if we want to spend time with someone under the moonlight, there's no one to support us. Third concubine did not say any sour words, only muttering. Madame Qiao's luck is quite good to find such a husband. With this brain of yours, why do you only think that young Master Qiao is not bad? Fourth concubine rolled her eyes. I think that Madame Qiao is also an interesting person. If you were surrounded like that just now, you would have cried and jumped into the river. Look at her. What is called 4 tales of force against 1,000 caddies. The art of controlling a husband is not simple. You should learn more, third sister. At this moment, Yin, who had the enviable art of controlling a husband, was on the way back to the courtyard with Xiao Zhu. On the way back, Yin did not dare to breathe loudly, nor did he raise his head to look at Xiao Zhu. He did not say a single word. Without a doubt, since this person had appeared at that time, it was obvious that this person had not just arrived. It was possible that this person had been standing behind for a long time. The words that she had said to smear Xiao Ju's reputation had most likely been heard by Xiao Ju. It was all the fault of that group of girls who were too talkative. They were so noisy that she did not hear Xiao Ju's footsteps. She did not know what Xiao Ju was thinking right now, but she knew that he must be very angry. What should she do to appease his anger when she returned? Apologizing before he gets angry? Just as she was thinking, the courtyard was already in front of her. On the way back, Yin and Xiao Ju saw Lin Shuanga standing in the courtyard, talking to a servant girl. Lin Shuanga, this lecher, said something to his new servant girl, which made her blush and laugh. When he raised his eyes, he saw that Yin and Xiao Ju had returned. Lin Shuanga greeted them. "Young master, young mistress is back? Where did you go?" Yin replied awkwardly, "I drank some tea. Let's talk about it later." She followed Xiao Ju back to the room. As soon as she entered the room, she bumped into Xiao Ju and almost fell into his arms. Xiao Ju looked at her indifferently, reached over her body, and closed the door behind her. "Yin, sit." He turned around and sat down at the table. His calm tone made Yin feel that he was denouncing him. Yin quickly sat down in front of him. "Why aren't you saying anything?" Xiao Ju raised his eyebrows and looked at her with a faint smile. "Weren't you very talkative just now, fierce girl?" Yin was shocked. "So he heard it," she said. "Commander-in-Chief, you know that they come to find trouble with me every few days. I can't stand it, so it's just a temporary solution. Can I ask, when did you arrive, and how much did you hear of what I said?" Xiao Ju sneered. "What's the difference?" "The difference is in the content of my apology." Xiao Ju stared at her for a while, then said, "Lady He, do you not care about your own reputation, or do you not care about my reputation?" "I'm sorry." Yin apologized sincerely, "but I think, now that we are young Master Qiao and Miss Wen, it should be fine to make our relationship more intimate. After all, it's normal for husband and wife to be intimate." Xiao Ju couldn't take it anymore. "Are you talking about intimacy? Isn't it? If I didn't come over just now, what were you going to say? What did you and I look at?" He was well-educated and couldn't bring himself to say those two words. However, Yin was obviously not as particular as him. He said straightforwardly, "You're talking about the spring map." Xiao Ju pinched her forehead. "You don't have to say it so loudly." Yin lowered his voice and asked doubtfully, "We looked at the spring map together, which means that we have a very good relationship. What's wrong with that?" Back in the days when they were in the barracks, the men had expressed their friendship with their lives. Most likely, they had shared their treasured treasure maps with their brothers. If they didn't have a good relationship, they wouldn't lend it to them even if they begged. It was even more so between husband and wife. When two people looked at the spring map together, it was like they were glued to each other. Xiao Ju's face darkened. He asked slowly, "Who told you that looking at the spring map together means that we have a good relationship? What kind of person was this?" He Sui taught his daughter how to say such things. She didn't even know what to say and what not to say. Did she know that if he didn't appear today and stop her from saying what she was going to say next, what she said would be enough to shock everyone in Jiang City? Yin suddenly stopped talking. "That's what I think. Also, after you looked at the spring map, you said that we had a good relationship. There wasn't any estrangement because of it, right? When did I look at it?" Xiao Ju's face turned pale. "You looked at it at that time." Yin insisted, "It's still a look. We've already looked at it together." He was slightly annoyed. "I didn't look at it." "You did." "I didn't." "Forget it." Yin said, "If you say you didn't, then don't." Xiao Ju felt a headache coming on. She was the one who was talking nonsense. Why did it seem like she was the one who was being unreasonable? "You're talking nonsense. It's fine if you don't take our reputation seriously, but you'll also ruin Xiao Huanxing and Wen Yuyin's reputations." He sneered slightly. Yin thought for a moment and said, "I understand. I won't tell anyone that we looked at the spring map together." "I didn't look at it with you," Xiao Ju emphasized again. "Then can I look at it myself?" Yin was puzzled. Why was Xiao Ju still brooding over this matter? "You're not allowed to look at it yourself." He raised his eyebrows and warned coldly, "Do you know what you said just now? You're a fierce woman." Yin coughed and choked on his own words. She pleaded softly. Commander-in-Chief, don't call me a fierce woman. It sounds like you're scolding me. Oh, Xiao Ju said with a faint smile, but I saw that you were quite happy when you said that I would marry no one else but you. If I couldn't marry you, I would jump into the river. Lady, he isn't tall, but I didn't expect you to have so many tricks up your sleeve. Isn't that to prove that your heart is as firm as a rock? Hien said helplessly. I just wanted them to give up. Otherwise, they would come to find trouble with me every few days. Who could stand that? You can use your beauty to commit crimes. The unlucky one is me. Commander-in-Chief, you have to have some sympathy. I don't have any sympathy? Xiao Ju was so angry that she laughed. If it weren't for the fact that he wanted to help her out and teach Ling Xiao and the others not to do useless things, he wouldn't have had to do so in front of others. Even now, he still felt uncomfortable. Why should I have sympathy? He said indifferently. Don't you have the ability to control your husband? You only need to hook your finger to make your husband dote on you. It sounds like your husband is more pitiful. Hien didn't know what to say. You have a face that makes people want to marry only you. Xiao Ju's lips curled into a playful smile. She stared into her eyes and said slowly, he loves you like a jewel and a treasure, but you don't love him as much as he loves you. You pester him, but he doesn't change his infatuation and insists on being with you for 3 lifetimes. Fierce woman, aren't you a little too heartless? Hien had goosebumps when he heard her call him a fierce woman. She quickly moved the stool closer to Xiao Ju and grabbed his arm. She said righteously, that's right. Our commander-in-chief is such a beautiful person. How can she be the one who pesters him? Other than you, no one else has the right to be called a fierce woman. If you want to be with someone for 3 lifetimes, don't even mention crossing a bridge. You can even cross a mountain of swords. No one can be heartless to you, no one. That's not what you said just now. He said slowly. What I said just now is a lie. I'm speaking the truth now. Hien said, you have to believe me. The girl's eyes were clear and firm, just like the wild cat he met in the courtyard. When its tail was stepped on, its fur would explode, but when it jumped up to be patted, it would be exceptionally obedient. A hint of a smile flashed across his eyes, but it disappeared in a flash. He said lightly, in the future, don't read such nonsense. He paused and said, let's forget about this matter. Hien was greatly relieved. This person was really not easy to fool. All he did was make him sound a little less cold, and he got so angry. It seemed that second young master Xiao really cared about his image in other people's eyes. Hien thought about it and said, Commander-in-Chief, don't just look at these things. Before this, I also said a lot of good things about you. For example, I said that you are proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting, and that you are omnipotent. Next time, you must perform well in front of them to prove that what I said is true. Xiao Ju sneered. Am I a street performer? That's not true. Hien scratched his head. He thought for a while and said to Xiao Ju, but next time, if something like this happens again, and there are still people who don't know how to read the situation and come looking for trouble, Commander-in-Chief, you must cooperate with me and show that we are a loving couple. Maybe this way, they will know how difficult it is and retreat and stop looking for trouble. Xiao Ju raised her eyebrows. Cooperate. Hien nodded. He glanced at Hien. If you beg me, I can consider it. Hien said, please, Commander-in-Chief. Xiao Ju. She actually said it out loud, so easily. He frowned slightly, and a mocking smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. You are so spineless, and you call yourself a fierce woman. I told you not to call me a fierce woman. Hien was angry. Commander-in-Chief, you are really childish. Oh! He raised his eyebrows and said word by word, fierce woman. Childish. However, after the incident in the garden, it was unknown whether Hien's words had an effect, or whether Xiao Ju's indifferent performance of doting on his beloved wife had an impact. For 2 days in a row, the entire Chui residence was very quiet. There were no more young ladies from Jiang City who wanted to drink tea and chat with Madame Xiao. Hong Xiao took out the teardrop gauze from the box and said, Today, Madame will enter the prince's residence, where this. Hien nodded okay. Princess Meng Ji held a banquet in the prince's residence today, and He Yin and Xiao Ju attended. She said that there would be guests, but they didn't know who they were. Cui Yuezhi was still a little confused. Why did Her Highness invite the two of you, but not me? He Yin knew that in Mu Hongjin's heart, her and Xiao Ju's identities had already been exposed. If Cui Yuezhi was also present, it would be inconvenient for them to talk. But there was an important guest, and she and Xiao Ju were invited to accompany them. Why? Did they know the other party? But they couldn't figure it out. They would know when they arrived at the prince's residence. After Hong Xiao dressed He Yin went out. Xiao Ju was already waiting outside, talking to Lu Buwang. These days, Lu Buwang wasn't around during the day and only came back at night. When he came back, it was too late. He Yin had already fallen asleep, so he didn't have time to talk to Lu Buwang. Now that she saw Lu Buwang, she had to go out again. Master, she said. In fact, there were several times when He Yin wanted to ask Lu Buwang if he wanted to see Mu Hongjin. But after all, it was someone else's business, and he couldn't interfere too much. Besides, only he knew what had happened between the two of them. Lu Buwang smiled and nodded at her. He be careful. He Yin nodded. Now that there might be Yudo in Jiang City, there might be people who had seen Xiao Ju. It was never a bad thing to be careful. Fei Nu and Qi Wu followed them as coachmen. Lin Xuan stayed in the Cui residence, so he didn't have to go with them. He Yin and Xiao Ju got on the carriage. He Yin asked, Commander, today, Princess Mengji specially asked you and me to go to the prince's residence for the banquet, but she didn't ask Cui Zhongqi. That means she was worried about our identities. But there are important guests coming. Could it be that the important guests know our identities? Who are they? Xiao Ju lowered her eyes. The emotions in her eyes were unclear, and her voice was extremely flat. People from Shuajing. Chapter 146. He Yin and Xiao Ju got off the carriage when they arrived at Prince Mingji's mansion. A servant led the way. This was not their first time visiting the Prince Mingji's mansion, so they felt much more at ease. The servant led He Yin and Xiao Ju to the entrance of the banquet hall and said respectfully, His Highness and the guests are inside. Young Master Qiao and Madam can go in directly. He Yin and Xiao Ju entered the banquet hall. Mu Hongjin was leaning on a soft couch, her red robe spread across her face. She had a faint smile on her lips and was listening to the zither player playing the zither. There was another person sitting at a short and long table with his back facing He Yin. He was wearing a bamboo-colored robe and had a jade hairpin on his head. His back view looked somewhat familiar. She was still trying to figure out who this person was when Mu Hongjin's gaze swept past them and she smiled. Military Governor Xiao is here. He Yin and Xiao Ju bowed to Mu Hongjin. At the same time, the man who was sitting with his back facing them also stood up and turned his head to look at them. The space between his brows was as gentle and elegant as an orchid, as clear as a banished immortal. He Yin never thought that he would actually see Chu Zhao and Meng Ji Wangfu in Jiyang. The shock only lasted for a moment. He Yin immediately knew that things weren't good. She was now disguised as a woman. She didn't know what Chu Zhao would think if he saw her. This person's identity was still unknown. If he went back and told Su Jingfu would use this matter to create trouble for Xiao Ju. That wouldn't be good. She stopped in her tracks and subconsciously took a step back toward Xiao Ju, trying to block Chu Zhao's gaze. However, she knew that unless she turned around and left immediately, her identity would be discovered by Chu Zhao sooner or later. Xiao Ju seemed to sense something. She turned her head slightly and glanced at her. She sneered. What are you afraid of? He Yin was about to speak when Chu Zhao saluted the Xiao Ju and said with a smile, Military Governor Xiao, Miss He. Well, He Yin must have seen it. He didn't even need to cover his face. He didn't even need to look in the mirror. He knew that his face must be very ugly at this moment. Xiao Ju said, Fourth young Master Chu. It seems like you two are old acquaintances. Mu Hongjin smiled. Sit, Fourth young Master Chu is a distinguished guest from the Shua capital. Xiao Ju and He Yin sat down at the short table next to them. The maidservant beside her came over to pour tea. Mu Hongjin waved her hand, signaling the musician who was still playing the guqin to leave. The banquet hall quieted down. He Yin lowered his head and looked at the tea leaves floating up and down in his teacup. Illness comes from the mouth, and disaster comes from the mouth. Dieting brings no disease, but choosing words leads to no disaster. At this time, it was best to speak less. Xiao Ju looked at Chu Zhao and said, "Fourth young Master Chu, what brings you to Jiang?" She went straight to the point and didn't say anything else. Chu Zhao lowered his head and smiled before answering. "I came to Jiang this time because of the Yudo." "Yudo?" Yin pricked up his ears to listen. He heard Chu Zhao say, "There are Yudo in Jiang now. I'm afraid that there will be chaos in the near future. I came this time to help your highness and prevent more people in Jiang from suffering from this disaster." He looked at Princess Mingji. Xiao Ju smiled slightly. "Fourth young Master Chu, how did you find out that there are Yudo in Jiang?" "We caught a Yudo in the Shuo capital who was plotting to start a war. We followed the clues and found out that the person who met him is now in Jiang. Father, and I found out from the other party's secret message that the Yudo is planning to start a war in Jiang. Once the canal is cut off, it will cause trouble for the entire Dawei. Father ordered me to immediately rush to Jiang and inform your highness of this matter to prepare for a rainy day." Xiao Ju raised her eyebrows and said in a mocking tone, "As far as I know, Shi Jinbo no longer cares about the matters in the residence. I'm afraid that he can't order fourth young Master Chu around." Lin Shuanghe had also said this to Yin. Shi Jinbo had been fooling around every day and didn't care about the matters in the residence. Shi Jinbo's wife was in charge of the matters in the residence. As for the rest, ever since Chu Zhao had sued Jingfu's support, Shi Jinbo had already become Chu Zhao's residence. "It's just a rumor spread by outsiders," Chu Zhao replied in a good-natured manner. "I don't dare to disobey father's words." Mu Hongjin seemed to have discovered something from the exchange between the two of them. She wasn't in a hurry to speak. Instead, she drank her tea lazily and quietly observed. "If you want to inform her highness, a secret letter will do." Xiao Ju sneered. "Fourth young Master Chu, why do you have to personally make a trip?" "Because there's something more important that needs to be personally handed to her highness." Mu Hongjin chuckled. "Fourth young Master Chu, you brought the Yudo's military defense map." Xiao Ju and Yin looked up at Mu Hongjin at the same time. With the other party's military defense map, the war was already half won. But how did Chu Zhao get such an important thing? Yin couldn't help but ask, "Fourth young Master Chu, where did you get this map? How can you be sure that the drawing on this map is real or fake?" "How I got it depends on luck." Chu Zhao smiled gently. "As for whether it's real or fake, I can't be sure. So, I can only give it to her highness." He paused and looked at Xiao Ju, "But I'm relieved to see Military Governor Xiao." With Military Governor Xiao around, regardless of whether the military defense map is real or fake, Jiang City will definitely be saved. After all, Dawei is a genius general, and only Military Governor Xiao has a meritorious service. Yan's heart skipped a beat when he heard this, and he couldn't help but look at Xiao Ju. The water attack in the Battle of Gui City's Long Valley was a hurdle that Xiao Ju couldn't overcome. Chu Xilan's words were like stabbing a knife into his wound. Xiao Ju's expression was calm. She curled her lips and looked back at Chu Zhao. "Fourth young Master Chu, aren't you making a mountain out of a molehill by coming all the way to Jiang with a military defense map that we don't know if it's real or fake? Or," she paused, and there was a meaningful look in her eyes, "do you have other important matters to attend to?" "How can you say that I'm making a mountain out of a molehill?" Chu Zhao shook his head. "If I stay in Jiang, I can advance and retreat together with all of you. If Yudo really has ulterior motives, Military Governor Xiao and I will fight against the enemy. If the news is fake, it will be a false alarm, and everyone will be happy." "Fight against the enemy together?" Xiao Ju said lazily. "Fourth young Master Chu, if you can't even save yourself, no one will be in time to save you." Chu Zhao smiled but didn't say anything. Second young Master Zhao's skill at mocking others was unparalleled. Moreover, Chu Xilan was indeed weak. If something really happened, he would be a burden. Military Governor Xiao. Mu Hongjin was almost done watching the show. She had a rough idea of the relationship between these two people. She looked at Xiao Ju I will give you a copy of the military defense map that fourth young Master Chu brought. The total number of soldiers inside and outside Jiang is about 20,000, and they will be under your command. According to the secret letter that fourth young Master Chu brought back, Yudo will definitely rebel within 10 days. Within these 10 days, She paused for a moment. Must ensure that the people of Jiang are safe. Xiao Ju raised her eyebrows. Your Highness, you have considered everything. Mu Hongjin glanced at the smiling Chu Zhao. Fourth young Master Chu came from afar, and both of you are old friends. Fourth young Master Chu will also be staying in the Chui residence for the next few days. If you have any important matters to discuss, it will be convenient for you to discuss them. Chu Zhao returned the greeting. Your Highness is very considerate. Yen, Mu Hongjin was really good. The moment she arrived, she arranged for these two sworn enemies to be together. Not to mention that they had important matters to discuss. Yen pondered. Just based on the fact that these two people could talk like swords, it would not be easy for them to pass these 10 days peacefully. After exchanging some pleasantries, Mu Hongjin got up and asked someone to send Yen and the others back to the Chui residence. When there was no one else in the banquet hall, the older maid beside her asked, Your Highness, why did you let fourth young Master Chu stay in the lieutenant commander's residence? Military Governor Xiao doesn't seem to like fourth young Master Chu. These two people don't get along, Mu Hongjin said faintly. If they don't get along, they can keep each other in check. Xiao Huaijin is a godly commander, but Jiang City can't be controlled by him alone. After all, no one knows if what he said is true or false. When these two people speak, half of it is true and half of it is false. If you compare them, you can always find some clues. Moreover, she sighed, stood up, and looked at the sky outside the hall. There's not much time left. If the Yudo really wanted to move against Jiang, from tomorrow onwards, she would have to arrange for the people of Jiang to evacuate from the city. Her Lord Father had handed Jiang City over to her. For so many years, she had been protecting Jiang very well. Now that things had come to this, she could not fail. There was also Mu Xiaolu. She turned around, the corners of her eyes red and deep. She said coldly, Go and call Xiaolu here. Yen and Xiao Ju left the prince's residence together. Chu Zhao stood beside them. When the three of them left the residence, they did not say anything. Yen was secretly thinking about how to make this lie flawlessly. He might as well insist that he was originally a man. This time, he disguised himself as a woman and went to Xiao Ju to Jiang because he had no other choice. As for why he acted so well, he would say that he was a man and a woman. She would have been following them for so long. Didn't he not discover anything? When he thought of this, his heart relaxed slightly. Miss He. As he was thinking, someone beside him called his name. Yen turned around. Chu Zhao stopped and looked at him with a smile. Xiao Ju also stood still and did not go far. Yen felt a little comforted with his superior by his side. He looked at Chu Zhao and smiled. Fourth young master, you don't have to call me that. Actually, I didn't expect to see Miss He dressed as a woman again after seeing Miss He in red. The young man smiled very gently. Even his praise was sincere. It sounded more sincere than the workers of the embroidery workshop and Lin Shuanghe, who blindly boasted with their eyes closed. This dress suits you very well. It suits Missy very well. Yan's prepared speech came to an abrupt end. What did he mean by, saw her last time? Ever since she entered the military camp, this was the first time she dressed as a woman. Where did Chu Zhao see her dressed as a woman? Yan subconsciously looked at Xiao Ju. Xiao Ju raised her eyebrows slightly, as if she was waiting for him to speak. Wait a minute. Could it be that Xiao Ju thought that she and Chu Zhao were already in cahoots? You can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want. Yan said, Brother Chu, I don't quite understand what you mean. When did I appear in red in front of you? Chu Zhao smiled faintly. At the race course in Shuajing. Missy personally went to the race course to protect her father and younger brother. She was valiant and formidable. It was unforgettable. At that time, the wind blew your white veil. He lowered his head and smiled. I accidentally saw your face. At that time, I already knew that you were a woman. The racecourse in Shuajing? What kind of old story is this? How can Chu Zhao still remember it? Does this mean that Chu Zhao already knew that I'm a woman? He Yin was shocked, so Brother Chu already recognized me when we were in Liangzhou. At that time, I saw that Missy didn't seem to want her identity to be exposed. Moreover, there were many people in the Imperial Guard station, so I didn't reveal it. Chu Zhao said. However, since we've met here today, there's no need to hide it anymore. Chu Zhao looked at He Yin and said gently, I'm not saying this for anything else. I just hope that Missy won't worry. I didn't reveal your identity when we were in Liangzhou. Now that we're in Jiang, I won't tell anyone either. After the incident in Jiang, Chu Zhao will pretend that he never met Miss He. Missy can still return to Liangzhou to make contributions. You don't have to worry about me spreading rumors. He probably noticed He Yan's misgivings when they were in the banquet hall earlier, so he purposely said these words to reassure He Yan. No matter what Chu Zhao's identity was, or what relationship he had with Su Jingfu, just from the way he spoke, he was really very considerate and thoughtful. It was very difficult for people to have a bad impression of him. He Yan smiled and said, Then I will thank Brother Chu first. There's no need to thank me between us, Chu Zhao said with a smile. I don't want Missy to be worried because of my appearance. As for the matter of snitching, Chu Zhao isn't that kind of person. Xiao Ju had been standing beside He Yin and listening to him coldly. When she heard what he said, a mocking smile appeared on her lips. Fourth young Master Chu, you make it sound nice. Didn't you come all the way to Jiang just to snitch? When it comes to snitching, you have to distinguish between friend and foe. Fourth young Master Chu, you don't have to worry about the people in the Southern Mansion Army. He raised his eyebrows and said calmly, Even if her identity is exposed one day, I can still protect her. Chu Zhao was stunned and looked at He Yin. Missy joined the Southern Mansion Army? He Yin replied, Yes. Xiao Ju had already promised him that if they pretended to be husband and wife to solve the Jiang incident, he would let her join the Southern Mansion Army. Although the current situation was not completely solved, it was up to his master to decide whether she would join the Southern Mansion Army or not. Since he said she would join. Chu Zhao's eyes moved slightly. After a while, he smiled. Then I'll congratulate Miss He. No, Brother He. He Yin nodded. Xiao Ju looked at him calmly. If there's nothing else, fourth young Master Chu, please find a carriage for yourself. The space between husband and wife is not suitable for outsiders. Fourth young Master Chu, please go ahead. He did not hide his disgust for Chu Zhao. Chu Zhao was not angry. He only smiled and said, Military Governor Xiao, let's meet at the Chui residence. He then smiled at He Yin. He Yin awkwardly smiled back. Qi Wu drove the carriage over. He Yin and Xiao Ju got on the carriage. As soon as they sat down, they heard Xiao Ju's cold voice. Were you the one who competed with Zhao at the Shuajing horse farm? He Yin complained incessantly in his heart. It's here, it's here. When Chu Zhao told him about the horse farm, he almost forgot that Xiao Ju was also there at that time. Moreover, Xiao Ju also gave He Yinsheng a horse. He Yinsheng named it Xiang Xiang. Yes. He Yin did not wait for him to speak and said first, My brother loved the horse that Governor gave him. He cut grass and fed it every day. He never had the chance to thank Governor. At that time, if Governor did not come to our rescue, I don't know how Zhao would have made things difficult for our family. He Yin is unable to repay Governor's kindness. Xiao Ju's eyes were cold. So you recognized me early on, right? He Yin was speechless. It was not just early on, they knew each other in their previous lives. But how could he say it? You are the governor of the right military, General Fengyan. Who in a way can be more handsome than you? I do know you. But at that time, you were high above the clouds, and I was just a small ant beside your boots. Even if I knew you, you did not know me. Later, when you entered the military camp, I guess Governor had already forgotten about this matter. After all, Governor is a person of high status. How could he remember a small ant? He Yin leaned closer to him. How would I know that Governor still remembers this matter? She clearly knew that this fellow was full of lies and flattery, but when she saw her bright eyes and white teeth sitting beside her and putting in her best performance, even if she was a little displeased, she also found it funny. Chu Zhao actually knew that this person was a woman before him. It sounded like he was kept in the dark and was at a disadvantage. Xiao Ju looked away and said lightly, "Have you met him again?" "No, no." He Yin quickly replied, "I only met him twice when I was in Shuo capital." Then he complained, "How would I know that it was such a coincidence? He was also at the racecourse at that time and saw my face. If I knew, I would have covered my face tightly and wore an iron mask. Look at how sharp his eyes are. He does not know who I am. You don't want him to see your face?" "Of course not." Yin was confused. "If I leave a loophole for others to exploit, who knows if something will happen?" Xiao Ju laughed softly. "You are not too stupid, Governor," Yin asked. "Do you think that fourth young Master Chu will tell others about my identity?" Although Chu Zhao said so, Yin did not dare to believe him easily, especially since this person's identity was mysterious. It was unknown whether he was an enemy or a friend. "Now you know to be afraid?" "Not really," Yin said. "If he wants to tell, I will pack up and run away in advance." Yin said and sighed. "It is just that I have been in the Liang Province Guard for so long. I really can't bear to part with Governor. If I really have to part with Governor, it will be very difficult. What you can't bear to part with is the opportunity to enter the Southern Prefecture Army." Xiao Ju was unmoved. "How can you think of me like this?" Yin said seriously. "With my skills, I will be highly valued by any general. The reason why I can't forget about the Southern Prefecture Army is because it is the governor's army." It was probably due to Xiao Ju's constant flattery that unknowingly, Yin was able to speak flatteringly without blushing or panting. "Governor, what you said just now still counts, right?" "What did I say?" "That even if my identity is exposed and everyone knows that I am a woman, you can still protect me?" Xiao Ju sneered. "Don't worry. No matter how long the Chu clan's reach is, it is not as deep as the Southern Prefecture Army." However, his beautiful eyes focused on Yin, and he said calmly, "Lady, he is so troublesome. Why should I waste my time and effort and take so many risks for you? Because we have seen the map together. It is not a normal relationship." Yin answered calmly. Xiao Ju's calm face suddenly cracked. "What did you say?" "Don't worry." Yin put his index finger in front of his mouth and made a shushing gesture. He said, "I will never tell anyone that the governor and I saw the map together on the first day you came to Jiang." The carriage stopped in front of the Chui residence. Yin and Xiao Ju had just entered. Before they reached the courtyard, they saw Lin Shuanghe hurriedly walking towards them. When Lin Shuanghe saw the two of them, he closed his fan. "You are finally back. Did you know? Fourth young Master Chu came to Jiang." Yin did not wait for him to finish. "You already know?" Lin Shuanghe was stunned. "He arrived just a moment before you. I heard that Princess Mengji arranged for him to stay in the Chui residence. What is going on?" He looked around and saw that there was no one around. He leaned closer and whispered, "Is there a conspiracy?" And younger sister Lin Shuanghe felt a headache coming on. "You can't let Chu Xilan see you like this. What if your identity is exposed? We have already met in the prince's residence." Yin comforted him. "Fourth young Master Chu also promised us that he will not tell anyone about this for the time being. Brother Lin, you can rest assured. You have already met?" Lin Shuanghe looked at Xiao Ju and Yin. He understood a little and asked, "Princess Ming Ji asked you to come to the prince's residence to meet Chu Xilan, right?" Yin nodded. "What is Chu Xilan doing in Jiang?" Lin Shuanghe asked curiously. "He's a young master from the Shuo capital. Wouldn't he come so far to sightsee? Why didn't he come earlier or later? You just arrived in Jiang, and he arrived right after you? What a coincidence." He didn't know about the Yudo yet. Yin said, "It's a long story. Where's my master?" "Mr. Liu just came back." Lin Shuanghe asked, "What's wrong?" Yin looked at Xiao Ju. "When I saved the Little Highness, my master also mentioned that he came to Jiang City to track down a group of Yudo. Since the news brought by fourth young Master Chu is related to Yudo, why don't you call my master over as well? Once we compare the information, we may find something else." After a pause, she was afraid that Xiao Ju didn't trust Lu Buwang, so she said, "My master is definitely not a bad person. Commander-in-Chief, you can rest assured." Xiao Ju nodded slightly. Call Mr. Liu and let's talk in the room. In the courtyard, the manservant moved the things unloaded from the carriage into the room one by one. From clothes to food, even a mattress and incense, everything was there. These things were all prepared for Chu Zhao before he came to Jiang by eldest Miss Su. If it were anyone else, they would have been touched and gratified by such considerate preparations. Chu Zhao sat in the room and looked at the small table that was gradually filling up, but his expression didn't change. Xiang walked over. Due to the terrain and rivers, the women of Jiang were born with deep eyebrows and were more beautiful. Even so, Xiang was still the most eye-catching one among them. She walked to Chu Zhao with a tea tray, put down the teapot, and poured a cup of tea for Chu Zhao. She said softly, "Young master, the room has been tidied up." Chu Zhao nodded and looked outside the courtyard. The room that Cui Yuezhi arranged was not far away from Xiao Ju's room. Military Governor Xiao has just returned, Xiang said. He entered the room with the swordsman in white and young Master Lin. Take it that they are talking together. As for what they were talking about, there was no doubt that it was related to him. However, he wouldn't take this matter to heart. Chu Zhao took a sip of tea and asked, "Do you know the whereabouts of Chai Anshi?" Chapter 147. Do you know Chai Anshi's whereabouts? Xiang shook her head. I heard that Princess Mingji is now sending people to search for Chai Anshi's whereabouts. Chu Zhao smiled carelessly. Xiao Huaijin came to Jiang to find someone. After a pause, he asked the woman beside him, "Who is Lu Buwang? I've never heard of this person's name before. On the surface, he's Military Governor Zhao's master. Where did Xiao Huaijin's master come from?" Xiang also nodded. But they seemed to trust and value Mr. Liu very much. Chu Zhao put down the teacup in his hand. These are not important. The most important thing is to find Chai Anshi before Xiao Huaijin. I understand, Xiang said hesitantly after a moment. But how do you plan to treat Miss He? Although he had already heard from Chu Zhao that He Yin was a girl, and his heart was already prepared, it was not until he saw He Yin's female body through the window that he felt it was real. It was really difficult to connect the petite and weak girl in front of her with the valiant and cold young man in her memory. Don't you think it's strange that Xiao Huaijin has a woman with him? Chu Zhao smiled slightly. I really want to know how much he trusts this woman. Xiang lowered her eyes and didn't speak. Niao Niao steam rose from the tea in the teacup and quickly escaped into the air, leaving no trace behind. On the other side, the people in the room were sitting separately. This is the Yudo's military defense map. He Yin handed the scroll to Lu Buwang. The fourth young master of Count Shi Jin's mansion brought news that the Yudo will attack Jiang in a few days, but I don't know if it's true or not. Master, take a look at this military defense map. Is there any problem? Lu Buwang looked at it for a moment and put down the scroll in his hand. I don't know if this map is real or fake, but if Yudo really wants to attack Jiang, it will indeed start from the canal, as depicted on the map. After all, the most important thing in Jiang City was this canal. Cutting off the canal meant cutting off the lifeline of the city. Mr. Liu, you once said that you were tracking Yudo to Jiang. Xiao Ju looked at Lu Buwang. Can you tell me the reason? Lu Buwang thought for a moment before saying, Every year before and after the Water God Festival, I will go back to Jiang to take a look. This year, before they reached Jiang, they encountered a massacre outside Jiang City. Someone took advantage of the night to kill all the people in the village outside the city. He changed into the clothes of the people in the village and entered the city with a fake identity. One of the children who was lucky enough to escape told me about this. I originally thought that it was an enemy seeking revenge or killing people to rob money. However, when I was investigating, I found that these people weren't from Dawei. These Yudo disguised themselves as commoners and sneaked into the city. It's not something that can be done overnight. I can only find a few. I'm afraid that before this, many commoners outside the city have already been killed. There are also many disguised Yudo in Jiang City. Master, are you saying that many Yudo have already entered? Ian asked. Lu Buwang said, Yes, they have been planning for a long time. They were waiting for the Water God Festival to cause trouble and kidnap His Highness. However, their plan was disrupted by you. so they should soon take action again. Master Lu, do you mean that there will be a war in Jiang City soon? Lin Shuanghe said nervously. Isn't it very unsafe here? Don't worry. He Yin comforted him. Princess Mingji once mentioned to us that she would evacuate the commoners from the city to a slightly safer place in the next few days. Brother Lin will be fine with the commoners in Jiang City at that time. Only then did Lin Shuanghe feel a little relieved, but he immediately put on a righteous appearance. He said, "What do you mean by following the commoners in the city? How can I be such a coward? Naturally, I will advance and retreat together with my brothers and live and die together. Don't try to persuade me. I must be with you and won't live alone." He Yin was speechless for a moment before he said to Lu Buwang, "Master, Princess Mingji has handed the city gate guards to the commander-in-chief. Do you want to come and take a look?" Have you forgotten? Lu Buwang was a little helpless. "I only know how to set up formations and don't know how to fight." That was true. Lu Buwang knew Chimen Duanjia, bow, horse, saber, and spear, but they were all his skills. Back then, when he taught her Chimen Duanjia, he studied it himself and used it to set up formations. Only then did he gradually develop his own set of skills. "You don't know how to fight?" Lin Shuanghe was very surprised. "My younger sister, he is so good at memorizing military books. I thought that a famous teacher produced a brilliant disciple." "Why? Is my younger sister, he is self-taught genius?" He Yin smiled awkwardly. "She's very talented. Maybe I was a female general in my previous life, so I can understand it easily." Xiao Ju sneered and didn't say anything. "In the next few days, I will continue to track down the whereabouts of that group of Yudo." Lu Buwang said, "If we find their heads, we may be able to solve a lot of problems. As for the city gate army of Jiang, I'll leave it to military governor Xiao." Lu Buwang looked at Xiao Ju. He now knew Xiao Ju's identity. The city gate army doesn't have the advantage in terms of numbers. "Military Governor Xiao, please take care of the people of Jiang." He seemed to have deep feelings for Jiang. Xiao Ju nodded. Everyone talked about the Yudo matter again. Xiao Ju would go to train the city gate army of Jiang City tomorrow. The time was very short, so it wasn't an easy task for him. Lu Buwang continued to track down the whereabouts of the Yudo. Lin Shuanghe didn't expect him to do anything, so he just needed to stay in the Chui mansion and wait for orders. As for He Yin, she became the most embarrassed one. She wanted to follow Xiao Ju to take a look at the city gate army, but Mu Hongjin didn't let her go. She didn't know if something would happen. She simply made another copy of the military defense map and planned to see if she could set up a new formation according to the terrain of Jiang overnight. If this military defense map was real, it would be twice the result with half the effort. If it was fake, she could find a loophole in it and wouldn't be fooled. After speaking, everyone was about to leave. As soon as they pushed the door open, they saw a beautiful maid standing under the tree in the courtyard outside the door. It was Chu Zhao's personal maid, Ing Xiang. She didn't know how long she had been standing here. When she saw everyone come out, she stepped forward and bowed to He Yin. "Miss He." He Yin returned the greeting. "Young master has something to say to Miss He," Ing Xiang said with a smile. "He's waiting in the front hall. Does Miss He have time?" He Yin looked back and saw Lin Shuanghe waving at her slightly, indicating that she shouldn't go. Xiao Ju looked calm, and no one could tell what she was thinking. Seeing this, Ing Xiang said with a smile, "Young master said that he might have some misunderstandings with Miss He before, so he wants to clarify things with Miss He in person. Last time, when we were in the Liangzhou Guards, he didn't have time to say goodbye to you and left without saying goodbye. It was very rude of him. He hopes that you won't take it to heart. Today he'll take it as an apology." He didn't take the small matter of leaving without saying goodbye to heart. There were so many things to do in the Liangzhou Guards, so he didn't have the time to pursue these trivial matters. He was the young master of Count Shi Jin's residence, yet he remembered it so clearly and spoke so politely. If she continued to be pretentious, it would seem that she didn't know what was good for her. Moreover, He Yin really wanted to know what identity Chu Zhao had now and what position he had come to the Liangzhou Guards. He also wanted to know whether the so-called dealing with Yudo was just an excuse or if he had other motives. Thinking of this, he cheerfully replied, "Okay." Lin Shuanghe's expression changed greatly. "Younger sister He, Thank you for your tolerance, young master. Ing Xiang was overjoyed. Commander-in-Chief, I'll go take a look first, He Yin said to Xiao Ju. You don't have to wait for me for dinner tonight. After saying this, he said goodbye to Lu Buwang. Master, I'll leave first. Lin Shuangha still wanted to say a few more words of advice, but He Yin had already left with Ing Xiang. Lu Buwang still had matters to attend to, so he only bowed slightly to Xiao Ju and Ing Xiang before leaving. After they left, Lin Shuangha asked Xiao Ju, "You're letting her go just like that? Otherwise? That's Chu Xilan. Didn't younger sister he like him so much that she lost her soul? She was stood up by him, and even went to look at the moon alone. Such an irresponsible, heartless person actually came back to find my younger sister he. Just wait and see. He'll definitely play the same trick again and use gentle attacks to move my younger sister he's heart. Isn't that good?" Xiao Ju turned around and lazily mocked. The liar finally got what he wanted. "Aren't you worried?" Lin Shuangha waved his fan and followed him closely. "If Chu Xilan sees my younger sister he's stunning red makeup, he'll be beastly and do something bad to my younger sister he. What should I do?" Xiao Ju entered the room, poured herself a cup of tea, and said casually, "Do you have some misunderstanding about Chu Xilan's taste? How can that liar's red makeup be worthy of the word stunning?" "How is it not stunning?" Lin Shuangha was angry. "Xiao Huaijin, you can't compare your own face with the rest of the world." Xiao Ju didn't bother to pay attention to him, and only said, "Besides, did Chu Xilan do something bad to her?" A trace of mockery flashed through his eyes. "The guy can twist off Chu Xilan's head with his bare hands. Instead of worrying about her innocence, it's better to worry about Chu Xilan." Lin Shuangha, He Yin bumped into Chu Xilan in the front hall. When Chu Xilan saw her, he smiled and stood up. "Miss He." Fourth young Master Chu. He Yin returned the greeting. The sky had already darkened. The night in Jiang City was lively and bustling. Chu Zhao looked outside and said, "Shall we go out for a walk?" He Yin didn't know what He Yin had in mind, but there were too many people in the Chui residence, so it wasn't convenient for them to talk like this. He Yin said, "Okay." The two of them walked out of the residence. Spring nights in Jiang were warm and harmonious. Along the banks of the river, hawkers carried lanterns and hawked their wares along the street. The pavilions were scattered randomly, and the scenery was beautiful. It could be said that between the alleys of the village, there were stringed instruments and singing, and there was a society where day and night were connected. However, such a gentle and bustling night was full of hidden murderous intentions. People came and went, and under the smiles of the hawkers, there were many Yudo who harbored evil intentions. When she thought about it this way, she felt that no matter how lively and interesting the scene was, it would become dull and boring. He Yin couldn't help but frown. "Missy, are you angry with me?" Chu Zhao, who was beside her, asked softly. "Why would I be?" She was a little surprised. "Then why did you frown when you went out with me? As if you had something on your mind?" He Yin couldn't help but laugh. "No, I was just thinking about the Yudo and was worried." After a moment of silence, Chu Zhao said, "Miss He, you don't have to worry. Her Highness will arrange everything. Besides, there's still Military Governor Xiao, isn't there?" He wasn't stingy with his praise for Xiao Ju. He Yin wanted to test him, so she asked, "I thought that fourth young Master Chu didn't get along with our governor." "Military Governor Xiao has some misunderstandings about me." Chu Zhao smiled. "However, his position is slightly different from mine. We're just working for different masters." He actually admitted it just like that. He Yin was a little surprised. "However, Military Governor Xiao and I are on the same page regarding the Yudo. Miss He, you don't have to worry." Chu Zhao said, "I'm a citizen of Dewei. Naturally, I don't want to see Dewei's rivers and mountains be invaded by foreign tribes." He Yin nodded. "That's natural. When the nest is overturned, no egg will remain unbroken. We should be united against foreign enemies." "Is Miss He relieved after hearing what I said?" He asked. He Yin asked, "Why are you relieved?" "I won't hurt Military Governor Xiao." "Miss He, you don't have to be wary of me because of Military Governor Xiao." He Yin laughed dryly. "Fourth young Master Chu, you're overthinking. I'm not wary of you." "Is that so?" Chu Zhao smiled a little sadly. But ever since we met this time, you stopped calling me Brother Chu. You called me Fourth Young Master Chu. It sounds like you're deliberately drawing a line between us. That works too? Yin said, It's nothing. If you don't think it's good, I can call you Brother Chu again. Then can I call you Ahe? Yin was stunned for a moment. The young man's smile was especially gentle, like a charming and harmless orchid blooming in the night. In the spring night of Jiang, his robes were fragrant, and his face was handsome. The passers-by couldn't help but glance at him. He was really eye-catching. It was hard to say anything harsh to such a good-looking and good-tempered person. Yin hesitated for a moment and said, If you want to call me that, then just call me that. Chu Zhao's eyes flashed with a hint of a smile. He continued to walk along the riverbank with Yin. He said, I haven't apologized to Ahe for what happened before. That day, I made an appointment to drink with you at Mount Baiyue, but something came up at the last minute, and I couldn't make it. The next day, I left early and didn't even have time to say goodbye to Ahe. Later, when I thought of this in Shuajing, I felt very regretful. Brother Chu, you don't have to take such a small matter to heart, Yin said. Moreover, you didn't do it on purpose. I'm not angry because of it. If it weren't for Chu Zhao, she wouldn't have gone to the foot of Mount Baiyue that night, and she wouldn't have waited for Xiao Ju. She also wouldn't have known that the person who saved her from the darkness on the mountaintop behind Yuhua Temple was Xiao Ju. Perhaps this was a blessing in disguise? Ahe didn't take it to heart because Ahe is broad-minded. Chu Zhao smiled. But I can't pretend that this didn't happen. I must apologize to Ahe. He looked forward. I'll give you something. Yin was startled. What is it? Chu Zhao stretched out his hand. In the palm of his hand lay a small tassel. The tassel was decorated with a very delicate pomegranate flower carved from red jade. Below the tassel was a red tassel. Although it was small, it was very ingenious. Today, at the gate of the Wang Fu, I saw he wearing a long whip at his waist. Chu Zhao looked at her gently. I was lucky enough to obtain a flower tassel. But I don't know martial arts and I don't have a weapon. It's a pity that it's with me. But this flower tassel is very compatible with Ahe's long whip. Why don't he try it and see if it'll be better? Yin subconsciously wanted to refuse. I can't accept a reward without any effort. Brother Chu, let's just forget about it. Besides, this thing doesn't look cheap. That red jade was small, and its color was translucent like the clouds. Who knew if it would be another several hundred gold? She always took things here and there and received small gifts there. Those who didn't know would think that she was really here to cheat. And he calls me Brother Chu, which means that he treats me as a friend. It's very common for friends to give gifts. Moreover, he worries too much. This flower tassel isn't expensive, and this jade is fake. He doesn't have to feel burdened. It's useless to leave this thing with me. He doesn't want it, but he dislikes me. Or perhaps, deep down in his heart, he still sees me as an enemy? Even if his words were slightly accusing and wronged, when he said it, it was still gentle and calm. Yin hesitated for a moment. Is this pomegranate flower tassel really a fake jade? Chu Zhao smiled. He wants real jade. I may need to raise some money. Since it was fake jade, it wasn't very expensive. It should be more straightforward to accept it. Yin smiled. Then, thank you very much, Brother Chu. She reached out and took out the purple jade whip from her waist. She tied the flower tassel to the purple jade whip's wooden handle. The black whip suddenly looked more lively and beautiful. It really matches Ahe's whip. Chu Zhao smiled. Courtesy demands reciprocity. Since Brother Chu gave me a flower tassel, I should also give Brother Chu something in return. In the end, Yin felt that if she didn't return the favor, she would feel that she was taking advantage of Chu Zhao. She said, if Brother Chu takes a fancy to anything in the night market today, I can give it to Brother Chu. After saying that, she reached her hand into her sleeve and touched her pitiful string of copper coins. She added weakly, however, I left in a hurry, so I didn't bring too much money. Brother Chu, you can choose what you want. After all, she didn't bring Lin Shuanghe with her today. She couldn't just buy whatever she wanted. Chu Zhao couldn't help but smile. He looked at her and said, okay. Yin followed him. The night market in Jiang was very lively. People were selling things at night. From snacks to rouge and face powder, old books and ancient books to rusty weapons, everything was available. Both of them were good-looking. When they walked past the place, they received warm greetings. When they reached the end of the road in front, they saw a group of people surrounding a vendor. Ian followed Chu Zhao to take a look and saw that it was a sugar painter. The peddler was a young man. He wore a clean green robe and sat in front of the stall. In front of him was a stone slab that had been wiped clean. Beside him was a large pot that was simmering with sparkling red syrup. He scooped a spoonful of syrup from the pot with a big iron ladle and poured it on the slate. His movements were very fast. The iron ladle moved up and down in his hand, like a painting brush. The falling syrup outlined a complicated or exquisite pattern. Soon it was cast into shape. Then he used a small spatula to scoop up the picture on the slate and stuck a bamboo stick on it. "This is a sugar pancake." Ian was happy. I didn't expect Jiang to have it too. In the past, when she was in Shuajing, there was a temple fair every year. Due to her subtle identity, she was afraid that she would be exposed. Therefore, she didn't go to such crowded places if she could. Therefore, she never went to the temple fair. She could only wait for her sisters to come back from the temple fair and secretly eavesdrop on them talking about the lively scenes and new things at the temple fair. Sugar pancakes were the same. There was a master who made sugar pancakes in Shuajing. He was very good at it. Every time Ian heard them talk about it, she looked forward to it. Once, she couldn't help but secretly beg Madame He to bring one for her. Perhaps Madame He saw how pitiful she was and how much she wanted it. So she really brought one for her from the temple fair. Ian still remembered that it was a picture of a bird. She couldn't bear to eat it, so she put the sugar figurine in the pen holder. However, the weather was hot, so it melted in 2 days. The syrup was sticky, and it melted on the table. Madame He scolded her. At that time, she didn't think it was dirty. She just regretfully scooped it up with her hands. She thought that it would be better if the sugar painting could last longer. She did not expect to see something new when she was young, but she did not expect to see it in Jiang. Looking at this young man's craftsmanship, she thought that he was on par with the master in Shuajing. Ian pulled Chu Zhao and squeezed forward. They saw that there were many sugar paintings on the haystack at the side. They looked like auspicious flowers, birds, phoenixes, birds, and beasts. They were very lifelike. Chu Zhao glanced at Yin and suddenly smiled. "I like this. He wants to give me something. Why don't you give me a sugar painting?" "You like this? What's so difficult about it?" Yin was very generous. She waved her hand. "Young man, what's the most expensive sugar painting you have here?" There was a banner next to the sugar painting. The price was 2 copper coins each. She brought a lot of copper coins, so it should be enough. The stall owner smiled and said, "The most expensive one is a flower basket. It costs 8 copper coins. Do you want one?" What was a flower basket? However, choosing the most expensive one was definitely not wrong. Ian then asked Chu Zhao, "Brother Chu, what do you think?" Chu Zhao tried to hold back his laughter. "That's good. Young man." Ian took out 8 copper coins and said, "Please make a flower basket. Make it beautiful." The stall owner said, "No problem." He scooped a spoonful of syrup from the pot and made a thin round cake. Then, he cast a circle of sugar lines on the round cake and slowly drew a vertical line. Ian watched intently as the flower basket changed from a flat bottom to a rich and lively one. There was a basket frame and a handle. The stall owner was very honest and added a lot of flowers to the handle. Ian counted. There were Chinese roses, daffodils, chrysanthemums, peach blossoms, lotus blossoms. Flowers from different seasons were all piled into a basket. It was lively and gorgeous. Ian watched as the basket filled up bit by bit. Suddenly, she had an idea. She asked the stall owner, "Young man, I'm giving this flower basket to my friend. Can you write my friend's name on the basket?" "Of course." Chu Zhao paused and his smile faded. "Ahi, that's not necessary." "What's wrong?" Ian was puzzled. "Your name is so beautiful. It's a pity that it's not written on the basket." "Beautiful?" "Yes." Ian nodded. "Zhao means bright. Xylan means vanilla. The person who gave you this name must love you very much. They hope that you have a noble character and a bright future. That's why they gave you such an elegant name." Chu Zhao was stunned. The girl had already turned around and said to the stall owner, Young man, please write Xylan. Chapter 148. On the way back, Ian kept looking at the basket of flowers in Chu Zhao's hands. The flower basket looked very beautiful. The peddler wrote the 2 words Xylan with extra care. His words were elegant and refined, and when placed together with the various fragrances in the basket, they really brought out the best in each other. Brother Chu, you must eat it as soon as you get back, Ian said. Otherwise, with the weather in Jiang, it will melt very quickly. She had also bought a qilin-shaped one for herself, but she had already finished it. I've tasted it. It tastes good, and it's not too sweet. Chu Zhao smiled gently. Thank you, He. I'll be very careful when I get back. Ian was finally relieved. After they bought the sugar paintings, they walked back along the riverbank. When there was nothing to talk about, Ian occasionally asked Su Zhiheng about his visit. Brother Chu, how was it when you went back to attend your friend's wedding? Was it very lively? Chu Zhao was slightly startled, but then he smiled and replied, Yes, it was very lively. After all, she was General Fei Hong's sister. His Highness the Crown Prince even personally came to congratulate her. Ian was a little suspicious. His Highness the Crown Prince? Did the Crown Prince come to see Su Zhiheng get married for Su Zhiheng, He Rufei, or both? Was the Crown Prince also involved in the conspiracy between the He family and the Su family? Furthermore, did the Crown Prince know her identity? But Chu Zhao sighed again. Perhaps Master Su was deeply in love with his late wife. During the wedding, he even cried. Ian said, Perhaps her face was full of disbelief, but Chu Zhao didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What's wrong? You don't believe that there are men in this world who are deeply in love? Ian thought to himself. Of course, she believed that there were men in this world who were deeply in love. For example, He Sui, her current father. After Madame He passed away, he raised his 2 children alone. Lady He was so arrogant and willful. He Sui could spoil the little girl because she looked like his wife. It could be seen that there were people in the world who were deeply in love and had no regrets. But this person could be anyone, and it definitely wouldn't be Su Zhiheng. It's not that I don't believe him. Ian concealed the ridicule in his eyes and said, It's just that if he behaves like this, wouldn't his new wife be angry? General Fei Hong and the other members of the He family were all deeply moved. So, although it's lively, it's just that this wedding banquet is a little sad. Ian felt that among the many jokes he had heard this year, Chu Zhao's joke was the funniest. Would the He family be sad for her? If this was said to the pigs in the pigsty, the pigs would feel that their brains had been insulted. But when Chu Zhao talked about this matter, it was obvious that most people thought this way. If he did something bad, then he did it. But after he did it, he put on a sorrowful and pitiful appearance and pretended to be a pitiful person who was rarely affectionate and righteous. It was really disgusting. He doesn't seem to agree with this one's words. Chu Zhao paid attention to her expression. Ian smiled and said, It's nothing. I just feel that this old Master Su is very interesting. What do you mean? If he really is deeply in love and can't forget his wife, even if His Majesty personally bestows the marriage, he can still refuse if he wants to. After all, he's a man. Ian lightly mocked. If he's a woman, it's normal for her to be unable to decide her own marriage fate. Brother Chu, you've heard of young masters who snatch by force. You've heard of evil tyrants who force women into prostitution. And you've heard of beastly fathers who sell their daughters for glory. But have you ever heard of a woman who does this? From what Brother Chu said just now, that old Master Su is like a weak woman who was forced to get married. That newly married young Mistress Su is like an evil person who forced him to marry her. What does this mean? If he doesn't want to get married, no one can drag him to the wedding hall. If he doesn't want to consummate his marriage, could it be that young Mistress Su can still take him by force? If he still continues to be obsessed with his deceased wife in the future, what will the new young Mistress Su do? I feel that it's not fair to that person. This friend of Brother Chu's is also a bit hypocritical. She spoke bluntly. He Xining was her younger sister from the same father and mother. Even though she hated the He family, He Xining had never done anything to her. Ian couldn't love her. nor could he hate her. He could only treat her as a stranger. Any sane person who heard this would only think that Su Jihing was the one who was in the wrong. It wasn't enough to destroy one member of the He family. Now he had to send in another victim. How cold-blooded and ridiculous. Chu Zhao was stunned for a moment. Then he suddenly smiled and stopped walking. He cupped his hands and said to He Yin, "Is this one narrow-minded? Or is it that brother he, as a woman, can stand in a woman's shoes and empathize? It's just that no one has ever thought of standing in their shoes. And he is very different from ordinary women." He Yin looked at her and asked, "How is he different?" Chu Zhao continued to walk forward. His voice was still very gentle as he said, "Most women, even when faced with this kind of predicament, have long been numb and indifferent. They don't think as much as a he does. A he is thinking for them right now, but it's very likely that they're enjoying themselves and will blame you for meddling in other people's business." He Yin smiled and said, "Brother Chu's words sound a bit high and mighty." Chu Zhao's smile froze for a moment. "Why do you say that?" The imperial court is a man's imperial court. The major affairs of the world are the major affairs of the world. Even when it comes to reading books and going to the battlefield, it's also men who have a unique style. The world praises men as heroes, but at most, they praise women as beauties. It's really unreasonable. Men have taken advantage of the world, but in turn, they blame women for being numb and not wanting to make progress. If this isn't high and mighty, then what is it? Brother Chu thinks that I'm very different from ordinary women because I've read books, walked out of the house, and even rebelled against the orthodoxy and entered the army. There aren't many women like me in the world. But if you let those women be like me and see the snow of the Liangzhou Guard, the water of Jiang City, the long moon of the desert, and the rivers, seas, and mountains, do you think they'll be willing to be trapped in a house that's filled with jealousy? Do you think they'll still be complacent, numb, and ignorant? He Yin smiled. At this moment, her smile carried a bit of ridicule. It was actually somewhat similar to Xiao Ju's. I think the men in the world are worried about this point, so they've set up many ridiculous rules to bind women. They've used the 3 cardinal principles and 5 constant principles to break their wings. They've also used those groundless virtuous wives and beauties to judge them. The more ignorant they are, the more the men feel at ease. It's clearly their fault, but they still have to say, "Look, women are shallow." Because they also know that once a woman has the chance to choose, she'll definitely not be willing to become a vase in the backyard waiting for her husband to feed her. Those outstanding women will become generals, swordsmen, scholars, and aides. They'll compete with them for the glory of the world, and they won't necessarily win. The girl's eyes were clear and bright like the spring water in Jiang City. They were transparent and clear, and one could see them clearly. They were clean and translucent, as if they could reflect the most brilliant sunlight. Chu Zhao was momentarily stunned. He had always been eloquent and would never make the atmosphere awkward, but at this moment, he actually didn't know what to say. It was as if no matter what he said, he couldn't refute the person in front of him. It was clearly laughable, overconfident, and naive to the point that it made people feel annoyed. It was awe-inspiring righteousness, but it actually reflected a person's shadow. There was nowhere to hide in the darkness. He also felt that it was unfair. Although pretending to be He Rufei brought a lot of pain to her life, at the same time, it also allowed her to see many things that women couldn't see in their entire lives. If she didn't pretend to be He Rufei, she wouldn't have known that compared to women, men could do so much more. If you were talented in literature, you could become a scholar with a stomach full of scriptures. If you were outstanding in martial arts, you could become a general with outstanding military achievements. Even if you were mediocre in everything, you could still be the most ordinary person on the street. To put it bluntly, even in Lutong village, women were gambling prostitutes while men were gambling customers. It was because she later became young Mistress Su and had been both a man and a woman that she knew that the world treated men and women differently. It wasn't that men didn't suffer, but their suffering could become the cornerstone to judge themselves. As for women's suffering, they waited their entire lives for men's affirmation. They were all reincarnated as humans, so who was more noble than the other? The funny thing was that some men even looked down on women from the bottom of their hearts. It made people speechless. After she finished speaking in one breath, she realized that Chu Zhao didn't say anything for a while. She secretly thought, could it be that my words offended Chu Zhao? But on second thought, if she offended him, then so be it. In any case, he didn't have the strength to trust a chicken. Even if he fought, he wouldn't be able to beat her. Brother Chu, what I said just now was a bit too impatient. He Yin said with a smile, I hope Brother Chu won't mind my lack of manners. I won't. Chu Zhao looked at her with a strange look in his eyes. He's heart is admirable. Chu Zhao is ashamed of his inferiority. In the future, I won't say such nonsense like today. He's words, I will always keep them in my heart. Chu Zhao was really a gentleman. Just now, she had said a lot of things, but he was still very gentle like a spring breeze. He Yin smiled, then let's go quickly. Chu Zhao nodded and smiled in response. The two of them continued to walk on the road back to Chui Manor. He Yin lowered his head and secretly sighed in his heart. Chu Zhao and Xiao Ju were ultimately different. When dealing with women, they both thought that women were weak and couldn't protect themselves. However, the former's judgment had a trace of negation and condescension, while the latter's treatment of the female corpse in the backyard of the Sun family in Liangzhou City was more of pity. As a general, he should be magnanimous, upright, calm, and brave. But more importantly, he should have a heart of pity for the weak. When He Yin and Chu Zhao came back, it was already very late. Chu Zhao's courtyard was a bit further away than He Yan's courtyard. When they reached the door, Chu Zhao said, he should also rest early today. Brother Chu, remember to eat it early. He Yin was still thinking about his candy basket painting, so he reminded him. He looked at the flower basket in his hand, shook his head, and smiled, definitely. He Yin watched him leave, then turned around and wanted to go back to the room. When she looked back, she saw a person standing in the small pavilion under the long corridor, looking at her with a smile. His white clothes fluttered in the wind. It was Lu Buwang. Master hasn't rested yet? He Yin walked over and asked. She rarely saw Lu Buwang these days at night. I came out to get some fresh air. Lu Buwang looked at her. Did you go to buy candy paintings? He Yin nodded. Fourth young Master Chu helped me hide my identity. After thinking about it, I still gave him something. I was kind to him, so he couldn't go around telling others my secret. Candy paintings in Jiang City are quite cheap. I gave him the most expensive one. It's at least 10 copper coins in Shuajing City, but only 8 copper coins here. It's cheap and good. Lu Buwang smiled and looked at her. You're much more lively now than before. He Yin was stunned. When she met Lu Buwang in her previous life, it was the most difficult time. She had just escaped from the peaceful days in Shuajing City and came to the cruel and bloody military camp. She had many secrets, so she was always a little cautious. Even though she occasionally showed her unbridled side when she was with Lu Buwang on the mountain, most of the time, she tried not to cause trouble for others. Now that she thought about it, it seemed that since she became Lady He, she had unconsciously let go of herself a lot. For example, going out to buy candy paintings with Chu Zhao today was absolutely impossible in the past. Was it because she was a woman now, or was it because she could do whatever she wanted without the restrictions of the He family? And she didn't have to worry about the secret under the mask being seen by others? Isn't it good to be like this now? He Yin said with a smile. It doesn't have to be steady. Lu Buwang said, it's good to be like this. When he said this, he looked a little disappointed. No one knew what he was thinking. He Yin wanted to ask, but when she saw Lu Buwang's indifferent gaze, she swallowed the words back. Lu Buwang seemed a little sad. The moon in spring was not as bright as the one in autumn. It was hazy and cute. Lu Buwang's gaze fell on the corners of his little disciple's mouth, but another figure appeared in his mind. Mu Hongjin. Back then, Mu Hongjin was also like this. Her eyes were clean and bright, and occasionally there was a trace of wisdom in them. Her red dress was also delicate, and there were always some flowers and birds embroidered on the corners of her dress, which was exquisite and beautiful. The young girl always had 2 long braids with silver bells under them. When she walked, the bells would make a pleasant tinkling sound. Sometimes, before he got close, he would hear the sound of the bells and know that she had come. At that time, he had such a tail following him every day, which was really annoying. He had said many times that he hoped the two of them would part ways. Every time, Mu Hongjin would pout and immediately cry. No matter how hard Lu Buwang's heart was, he was not good at dealing with a girl's tears. So every time, she easily resolved it. In the end, he had tacitly agreed that this person was a sticky candy that he couldn't get rid of. He let her follow him and cause trouble for him. Mu Hongjin knew how to enjoy life. She had brought a lot of money, but in less than half a month, she squandered it all. At that time, Lu Buwang didn't know that Mu Hongjin was the beloved daughter of King Mingji, and he only despised her extravagant and lascivious life. She didn't care what Lu Buwang thought of her. She had so much money, and she insisted that he enjoy it with her. Half a month later, Mu Hongjin had spent all her money, so she had to eat with Lu Buwang. In the inn, they slept in the simplest kind, and the food was also very ordinary. Mu Hongjin didn't have money to buy the trinkets on the street. After half a day, she protested to Lu Buwang, "Young hero, can't we have a good meal?" No. Lu Buwang didn't have much money. The 7 disciples of Taoist Yunji went down the mountain to gain experience. Although it was said that they went down the mountain to gain experience, in fact, they were just experiencing the secular world. As for what they did in daily life, his senior fellow apprentices gave him some of the work they had received before. To put it bluntly, they took the money from others and had to eliminate disasters for others. It was just that their sect was not allowed to do evil or curry favor for personal gain. So much so that in the end, what they really did was to help the tenants of the farmstead find their lost sheep or help a married girl send a secret letter back to her maiden home. These kinds of trivial matters, and the money they received was also very little. Sometimes, they even had to help people write letters to their families. They didn't refuse anyone and accepted everything. A cold and otherworldly young man in white walked on the path of the farmstead with a lost sheep. The scene was a little funny. Mu Hongjin laughed at him. "What kind of sect do you belong to? Why do you have to do everything? Why don't you follow me?" You what?" Lu Buwang asked her angrily. Mu Hongjin rolled her beautiful eyes. "I'll pay you more than he does." Lu Buwang was so angry that he didn't want to speak. But it was true. After all, he hadn't finished the task his senior fellow apprentice gave him. Because he was doing these small things, he didn't get much money. If he was alone, it would be fine. But now that Mu Hongjin was with him, he had spent all his money. One person had become 2 people. In meals, life was so tight that he wished he could split a copper coin in half to spend it. It could be seen that Mu Hongjin was also trying her best to adapt to this rough life. She made a fuss for a few days, but when she saw that Lu Buwang was really a little angry, she didn't dare to say anything more. She honestly lived a simple life with Lu Buwang, but her habit of wanting to buy everything she saw in her bones still hadn't changed. Lu Buwang still remembered that one day, they met an old woman selling flowers beside a tea house outside Jiang City. There were 2 bamboo baskets and a carrying pole in front of the old woman, and the bamboo baskets were full of wild chrysanthemums. They were slender and lovely, light pink and white. They were also very cheap. They should have been picked directly from the foot of Qian Mountain. Mu Hongjin leaned over to take a look. Seeing this, the old woman said with a smile, "Young master, buy me a flower to wear." "No need." Okay. The 2 of them spoke at the same time. Lu Buwang gave Mu Hongjin a warning look, and Mu Hongjin pursed her lips aggrievedly. The old woman smiled, picked a flower from the bamboo basket, and gave it to Mu Hongjin. "You're pretty, so this flower is for you. Wear it on your head. It's very beautiful." Mu Hongjin took it happily. She said sweetly with a smile, "Thank you, Granny." In this case, Lu Buwang couldn't just leave, so he took out a copper coin from his sleeve and handed it to the old woman. No. The old woman looked at him with a smile. "The little girl is cute. I like her. Young master, just treat her better in the future." Lu Buwang turned his head. Mu Hongjin got the flower and put it on her ear happily. She asked Lu Buwang, "Is it beautiful?" Lu Buwang said uncomfortably, "It has nothing to do with me." Mu Hongjin glared at him, squatted down, and looked at the jewelry and cosmetics in the carrying pole. After a while, she picked up a silver bracelet and exclaimed, "This is beautiful." It was a very simple silver bracelet. It seemed to have been roughly polished by someone, and even the edges were not very smooth. On the edge of the bracelet, a circle of lifelike wild chrysanthemums was carved, so it looked fresh and lovely. "This is so beautiful," Mu Hongjin praised. "This is called a happy bracelet. It was carved by my husband and me together." The old woman said with a smile, "Give one to your sweetheart and wear it for the rest of your life. Young master, why don't you buy one for me? It will last forever." "Did you hear that, young hero Lu?" Mu Hongjin begged. "Quickly give me one." Lu Buwang looked at her coldly, took the silver bracelet from her hand, and put it back into the carrying pole. Then he said coldly to the old woman, "She's not my sweetheart." A trace of disappointment flashed through Mu Hongjin's eyes. In the end, she didn't take the silver bracelet again and muttered, "How do you know that I'm not your sweetheart? How do you know?" "Yes, how do I know?" The young man was proud and didn't understand that the joy of youth came quietly. By the time he understood, it had already become a calamity and there was no way to avoid it. Later, many years had passed. Lu Buwang often thought that if he had bought the silver bracelet in front of Mu Hongjin and put it on her hand that day, they wouldn't have come to that point. As the old woman said, they wouldn't have been separated for the rest of their lives. It was ridiculous that he also believed that strange forces and gods were predestined. The moonlight sprinkled on the ground, forming a layer of white frost. The bell in his memory gradually faded away, and only the wind in Jiang City that had been separated for many years fell in his ears. It was lonely and a little cold in his heart. "Do you like Xiaoju?" The unexpected voice interrupted He Yan's contemplation. He Yan turned his head in surprise. Lu Buwang retracted his gaze and looked at her with a knowing smile. He repeated again, "Eh, do you like Xiaoju?" "No," He Yan subconsciously retorted. After a while, she asked again, "Master, why do you say that? Haven't you noticed?" Lu Buwang said lightly, "When you're around him, you're very relaxed. You trust him more than you trust me." He Yan was stunned. Did she? Maybe she did. Whether it was in the previous life or this life, she might have many misunderstandings about Xiao Ju's appearance in her heart. Whether he was indifferent or bad, she had never doubted that Xiao Ju would hurt her from the beginning to the end. He Yan, who seemed to be careless about everything, always maintained a sense of vigilance in her heart. She didn't let go of this vigilance when facing Lu Buwang, Su Zhiheng, He Rufei, and even He Sui and his son, who had no attacking power in the He family. But she always trusted Xiao Ju. It's not time or experience that makes you so relaxed now. It's him. Lu Buwang's voice was gentle. "He, do you still want to deny it?" Ian didn't speak. After a while, she raised her head and looked at the moon hanging on the roof. The moon was big and white, and its silver light sprinkled over the whole yard, gently watching the people in the night. "Master, look at the moon in the sky," she said slowly. "It can shine on the backyard of the rich and the ditch in the wilderness. But you can't catch it, right?" "I can't catch the moon, nor can I make the moon come for me, so I can just stand here and look at it from afar." Chapter 149. When He Yin returned to the room, the lights were still on. The two maidservants were lying on the side of the room, playing with a flower rope. When they saw He Yin, they quickly stood up and greeted, "Madam." He Yin whispered, "It's nothing. You can sleep. I'm going to rest." "Is young master asleep?" Chui Jiao shook her head. "Young master has been reading." He Yin nodded, "I know. You should rest early too." She pushed the door open and entered the room. Xiao Ju was sitting at the table, flipping through a long scroll in his hand. He was only wearing his inner garment. The snow-white garment hung loosely on his shoulders, revealing his jade-like skin. His collarbone was thin and as beautiful as the moon. He unclosed the door and walked to his side. "Governor?" he asked. Xiao Ju only raised her eyes and glanced at her indifferently without saying a word. "I thought you were asleep." He Yin removed the whip from her waist and hung it on the wall. The colorful tassel hanging from the handle of the whip swayed with her movements. The red pomegranate flower was even more exquisite and very eye-catching. Xiao Ju's gaze fell on the colorful tassel. Yin saw that Xiao Ju was looking at it, so she took off the whip and handed it to him. What do you think, Commander? Does it look good? This is a gift from 4th Young Master Chu. Chu Xilan is so generous. Xiao Ju narrowed her eyes and said calmly, "It's such an expensive gift. He doesn't think it's a waste to give it to you." Expensive? Yin asked curiously. 4th Young Master Chu said that this pomegranate flower is fake jade and isn't worth much. I accepted it because he said so. Oh! He raised his eyebrows and said mockingly, "He's very considerate. Is it really that expensive?" Yin was a little uneasy. "Then I'll return it to him tomorrow. If there were any unclean things in the future, such as money, it was better to be clear about it." Xiao Ju said, "Just accept it. Don't you like him very much?" Yin was shocked. "Do I like him? Why didn't she know? I didn't want to meddle in your business, but I still have to remind you." The young man's eyebrows were unbelievably handsome under the light. His eyes were dark and deep, with a hint of inexplicable coldness. Chu Xilan is Su Jingfu's son-in-law. If you don't want to die, stay away from him. Su Peining was the apple of Su Jingfu's eye. She seemed to like Chu Xilan. Lin Shuangha had told her about it before. But what did it have to do with her? Not to mention whether she liked Chu Zhao or not. Chu Zhao was such a refined and polite person. He would definitely not like a woman who sat cross-legged on the bed and practiced boxing. Xiao Ju was worried for nothing. "Commander-in-Chief, I think you're too anxious about 4th Young Master Chu. You're even prejudiced against me." She squeezed to Xiao Ju's side and bent down to look at the scroll in Xiao Ju's hand. "It's so late." "What are you looking at?" Xiao Ju ignored her. Yin stood behind him and craned his neck to look. After a while, he said, "It's a military defense map. What do you think? Do you see any problems?" "The way you speak," Xiao Ju said calmly, "makes it sound like you're the commander-in-chief." Yin immediately withdrew his hand from his shoulder and moved a stool to sit beside him. He said, "I'm just too concerned. The Yudo will soon know that Princess Mengji has been evacuating the citizens of Jiang City these past few days. Once the Yudo receive the news, they will soon mobilize their troops." Yin had a headache. But there are too few soldiers in Jiang City. Since the Yudo dared to attack the city, they must have brought no less than 100,000 soldiers. 20,000 against 100,000. These 20,000 soldiers were the city gate guards who had not fought in many years. No matter how one looked at it, the situation was not very comforting. "Weren't you a female general in your previous life?" Xiao Ju leaned back in his chair and twitched the corner of his mouth. "Tell me what to do." Yin was stunned. What was this? He was obviously telling the truth, but it was treated as a lie. In the military defense map, they came from the water. Yin said, "Since that's the case, we can only attack with water." After saying this, she carefully raised her eyes to look at Xiao Ju's expression. The young man's expression was as calm as ever. The wine sword hanging on the wall was sparkling like snow and was as cold as ice. Strangely enough, she and Xiao Ju had a life and death experience in the water. When it came to water, there was always a shadow in their hearts. The other was that their first battle was a water battle. To him, attacking with water was not a good memory. However, they were in Jiang City. No matter what, they could not avoid such a battle. Yin suspected that she and Xiao Ju were fire spirits in their previous lives. They had such an ill-fated relationship with water. "Tomorrow morning, I will go to the martial arts field to train the soldiers." Xiao Ju said, "You should go too." "Me?" Yin hesitated. "I really want to go, but won't Princess Mengji be unhappy?" In name, Xiao Ju was Dou Wei's right military commander. No one could train soldiers better than him. However, Yin was only Xiao Ju's subordinate. "Don't worry about her." Xiao Ju said, "You should go with me." It was late at night. A man sat in front of the long table in the room and quietly looked at the basket of flowers on the table. The sugar paintings were red and sparkling under the warm light of the oil lamp. The flowers in the basket were dense and luxuriant. In front of the basket, there were two words written, Zilan, upright and beautiful. A smiling voice seemed to ring in his ears. Zhao means light, while Zilan means vanilla. The person who gave you this name must have loved you very much and hoped that you would have a bright future. That's why they gave you such an elegant name. The person who gave him this name must have loved him very much. Chu Zhao never thought so. His mother was called Yi Runmei. She was the daughter of a small official in Qin County. She was as beautiful as a fairy. His memory was the same. She was a woman with impeccable features. She was beautiful, charming, and pitiful. In her delicate posture, there was a hint of innocence and nobility. He would never forget such a beauty, even if he saw her once. Many men in Qin County wished to marry Yi Runmei, but Yi Runmei had taken a fancy to the equally handsome Shi Jinbo, Chu Linfeng, who came to Qin County to work. Even in Shuajing, Chu Linfeng was a rare handsome man. In addition, he was generous with his money and had been in the midst of women for so many years. He knew very well how to please people. Not long after, Yi Runmei secretly fell in love with this romantic and considerate young Master Chu. Not only did she fall in love with him, but she also spent a good night with him. However, in only 3 months, Chu Linfeng had to leave Qin County and return to Shuajing. Before leaving, Chu Linfeng told Yi Runmei that he would come back to marry her. At that time, Yi Runmei was immersed in her dream of waiting for her sweetheart to marry her. She didn't realize that other than knowing Chu Linfeng's name and where he lived in Shuajing, she knew nothing about him. After Chu Linfeng left, there was no more news about him. Not long after he left, Yi Runmei found out that she was pregnant. She was anxious and scared. She didn't dare to tell anyone. However, her belly grew bigger day by day. In the end, she couldn't hide it. Master Yi was furious. He asked Yi Runmei who the father of the child was. Yi Runmei didn't even know the father's true identity. How could she say it clearly? She could only cry nonstop. In the end, Master Yi had no choice but to call a doctor. He planned to abort the child in Yi Runmei's belly. After a year and a half, he would send Yi Runmei to get married. This matter would rot in her belly forever. Yi Runmei knew her father's plan and ran away that night. She didn't want to abort the child. She didn't know if it was because she missed Chu Linfeng or because of other reasons. Anyway, she ran away. Yi Runmei decided to go to Shuajing to find Chu Linfeng. She was a pregnant woman. How could she walk so far? However, because of her beauty, she met a merchant along the way. He took the initiative to help her and agreed to take her to Shuajing. Before they reached Shuajing, Yi Runmei gave birth. Chu Zhao was born at this time. After Chu Zhao was born, Yi Runmei's miserable days had just begun. The merchant wasn't a kind person. He liked Yi Runmei's beauty and wanted her to be his concubine. Yi Runmei refused and scratched the merchant. In anger, the merchant sold Yi Runmei to a brothel for 10 taels of silver. Chu Zhao was also sold. The brothel mother thought that since Yi Runmei was so beautiful, her son wouldn't be bad either. If he was good-looking in the future, she might be able to earn another sum of money. If he wasn't good-looking, it wouldn't be a loss to be a servant. Yi Runmei and Chu Zhao lived together in the brothel. The pampered and spoiled young miss didn't know the evils of the world. In the brothel, she saw all kinds of ugly and evil people. It was as if they wanted to take back everything she had in the past. Yi Runmei's life was worse than death. The long-term torture changed her temperament. She became irritable and irritable. She didn't dare to be rash in front of her clients, but she vented her anger in front of Chu Zhao. She often beat Chu Zhao. If it wasn't for the protection of the other girls in the brothel, Chu Zhao felt that he wouldn't have lived to see Chu Linfeng. Chu Zhao didn't understand what Yi Runmei's feelings for him were. If she didn't love him, then she left home alone to protect the flesh and blood in her belly. She suffered a lot, but she didn't give up on him. If she loved him, then why did she say those heart-wrenching words to him? Her eyes were full of hatred. She always hit him with a bamboo pole and said, "I hate you. If it wasn't for you, my life wouldn't be like this. Why did you appear? Why don't you die?" After the vicious curses, she looked at the scars on Chu Zhao's body and hugged him. She cried, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Ah Zhao Xilan, don't blame me. I feel sorry for you." He was at a loss when he was young. He didn't know whether he loved or not. He just looked at the crying woman and felt a trace of disgust. He hoped that these days would end soon. He hoped that he could grow up quickly and escape from this dirty and hopeless place. Yi Runmei wasn't the only one with such thoughts. She was also looking for an opportunity. She never gave up on finding Chu Linfeng. She cursed Chu Linfeng's heartlessness and was full of hope for him. She always looked at Chu Zhao as if she was looking at all the hope. Maybe she left Chu Zhao in the past so that one day when she saw Chu Linfeng again, she could stand in front of him and tell him, "This is your son." Then she would tell him all the hardships and sufferings in the past few years. Chu Linfeng would feel sorry for her and marry her as he said to her in the past. He would make up for what he owed her and her son all these years. Yi Runmei thought so. So she always took the initiative to entertain every guest from Shuajing. She was born beautiful and easily became the top beauty in the brothel. Although she wasn't in Shuajing, there were always people from Shuajing who came and went. One day, she actually met someone who knew Chu Linfeng. That person was Chu Linfeng's friend. At first, when he heard Yi Runmei talk about the sad past, he just thought it was fun and occasionally comforted her to satisfy his kindness as a savior. But when he heard that the person was called Chu Linfeng, was handsome, and was from Shuajing, his face gradually changed. Those who knew Chu Linfeng knew that he was a womanizer and was especially lecherous. It wasn't impossible for him to hook up with a woman from a small family when he was outside. But this matter wasn't done properly. In any case, she told the truth and let him give up. She didn't leave him in the same place and wait for so many years. Instead, it became an ill-fated relationship. My poor child. I don't know if he will have the chance to see his father in this life. Yi Runmei covered her face and cried. "You have a child?" The friend was shocked and asked, "Can I see him?" Yi Runmei let Chu Zhao out. Chu Zhao's nose and mouth were like Yi Runmei's, but his eyebrows and eyes were the same as Chu Linfeng's. They were gentle and affectionate. When he looked at people, he always seemed to have a gentle smile. If this face said that he was Chu Linfeng's son, no one would doubt it. The friend got up, said a few perfunctory words, and hurried out. Yi Runmei was very disappointed. When the friend returned to Shuajing, the first thing he did was to find Chu Linfeng at Count Shijin's residence and asked him if he had a brief relationship with a beauty many years ago in Qin County. Chu Linfeng thought for a long time and finally vaguely remembered that it was a very beautiful woman. Unfortunately, she was a little stupid and believed everything he said without a doubt. "That woman is now living in a brothel," the friend said. "She even gave birth to a son for you. I've seen that child. He looks very similar to you and is very beautiful." This was out of Chu Linfeng's expectations. Madame Chu was ugly and had never cared about his affairs outside. Thus, he was happy and at ease. He brought 19 concubines into the residence, all of whom were outstanding beauties. Unfortunately, Madame Chu only had one condition. He could take concubines, but the child had to crawl out of her womb. Madame Chu gave birth to 3 children. Chu Linfeng didn't have much interest in having more children, so he felt that it was enough. His only regret was that none of his 3 sons had inherited his looks. Their looks were mediocre. He knew that his colleagues and friends were laughing at him behind his back. He had been greedy for good looks all his life, but unfortunately, his sons were mediocre and not attractive enough. But now, someone had come to tell him that he actually had a son who was lost outside. Moreover, the son was very outstanding and looked very similar to him. To him, this was a good thing that fell from the sky. For a moment, he really wanted this child to acknowledge his ancestors. This way, if others said that he couldn't give birth to a good-looking son, he could ruthlessly slap them in the face. However, Chu Linfeng had been respectful to his wife for many years. Although Madame Chu looked dignified, she wasn't someone to be trifled with. Otherwise, the concubines in the Chu residence wouldn't have no sons. Chu Linfeng had no choice but to beg the old madam, his mother. Although Madame Chu didn't care much about a concubine's son, he he was still the blood of the Chu family. It wasn't good for him to be wandering outside, especially in a brothel. Thus, she personally went to find Madame Chu. Madame Chu and the old madam talked for 2 hours. When they left the residence, Madame Chu personally ordered people to go to the brothel in Danzhou to bring the concubine's son back. However, that concubine's son didn't mention Yi Runmei. Although Shi Jinbo wasn't the most powerful person in the capital, he was still a high-ranking official. To the people of Danzhou, he was even more unreachable. When the letter flew from the capital to Danzhou, Yi Runmei almost couldn't believe her eyes. She knew that Chu Linfeng wasn't an ordinary person. He was so generous, and his charm was especially different from the men in Qin County. His family background wasn't bad. However, she didn't expect him to be the current Shi Jinbo. He was someone she didn't even dare to think about in her life. It was as if she had endured and planned for this moment for many years and finally reaped the sweet fruit. She hugged Chu Zhao and cried with joy. "Xilan, your father is here to pick us up. We can go home now." Chu Zhao quietly allowed the woman's emotional tears to fall on his neck. His young face was indifferent to his age. Go home? Who could be sure that this was just jumping from one fire pit to another? After all these years in the brothel, the men he saw were all greedy and evil, and the women were all stupid and weak. There was no difference. However, Yi Runmei didn't think so. She spent all her savings to buy many beautiful clothes and jewelry. She dressed Chu Zhao like a young master from a rich family and dressed herself like a charming flower. She looked at the woman in the mirror. She was still beautiful, but her skin wasn't as smooth as when she was young. There was no more innocence in her eyes, no more coquettish. She cried. Spring was as beautiful as before, but the beauty was past her prime, and the man who promised to marry her hadn't come yet. Yi Runmei thought that since Chu Linfeng was Shi Jinbo, he definitely wouldn't marry her, but it would be good to make her a concubine. Her son was also Shi Jinbo's son. She had been living a hard life in the brothel all these years. Being a concubine of an official was more noble than being a prostitute here. She wanted to dress herself up beautifully. When she saw Chu Linfeng, she wanted to tell him how much she suffered for him all these years. She wanted to tell him how much she loved him. Yi Runmei thought that she was clever. Any man in the world would feel proud when he heard that a beauty was infatuated with him. And this pride would make him feel more tender and doting on the beauty, so as to show his heroic feelings. She wouldn't let go of this opportunity. She wanted to regain Chu Linfeng's favor. Even if she was only a concubine, she wanted to be the one who attracted him the most. However, Yi Runmei didn't expect that Chu Linfeng didn't come. It was 2 women and a group of servants who came. They looked at Yi Runmei condescendingly. They couldn't help but look at her with contempt. It was as if they would dirty their eyes if they looked at her more. The leading woman asked, "Where is young Master Chu?" Yi Runmei felt humiliated. She wanted to get angry, but in the end, she put on a humble smile. "He's changing in the next room." She had told Chu Zhao in advance to put in the jade hairpin to make her look elegant and cute. Good. The woman lowered her eyes and smiled insincerely. Yi Runmei felt uneasy. She asked, "What do you want to do?" One woman came over and pulled her hand back. Another servant covered her mouth with a handkerchief. Yi Runmei's eyes widened. She realized what they were going to do to her. She struggled with all her might and said angrily, "How dare you? How dare you? Aren't you afraid that Chu Linfeng will find out? Chu Linfeng will kill you." The woman looked at her coldly. Her smile was bone-chilling. "We don't dare to make such a big decision without the master's permission. Miss May." She called Yi Runmei by her name in the brothel. "Would our Count Shi Jinbo's mansion accept a prostitute who rides thousands of men in the brothel? Do you want people to laugh at the master? Or do you want people to laugh at your son?" Yi Runmei struggled with all her might, but her body was slender and weak. How could she be a match for the woman? She gradually lost her strength. Getting rid of the mother and keeping the son is already a gift to you. Yi Runmei's legs gradually stopped moving. She fell straight to the ground with her eyes wide open. She had waited for her husband all her life. She was so happy that she thought she had made it, but she was waiting for death. Chu Zhao put in the hairpin and looked around in the mirror for a long time. Then he walked to his mother's room. He wanted to knock on the door, but when he reached out his hand, he hesitated. He gently pushed the door a little to see what his father looked like. Then he saw two old women carrying Yi Runmei as if they were carrying a dead pig. They hung a piece of white silk on the beam and covered Yi Runmei's head with it. Yi Runmei's face was facing the door. Her eyes met his. Surrounded by pearls and jade, beautiful snow and red makeup, holding hatred toward the netherworld, unwilling to close her eyes even in death. He staggered and covered his mouth to prevent himself from screaming. The people in the room were still talking. She is beautiful, but how can she be so stupid? She still wants to marry into the family? She didn't even think about it. Which rich family would accept a woman from a brothel as a concubine? After all, she came from a small family. She doesn't know what it means to get rid of the mother and keep the son. If she had stayed in Qing County, she wouldn't have lost her life. TSK, she's just greedy. Chu Zhao slowly retreated. When he was far enough away from the door, he suddenly ran. He didn't know which family he was in, but he closed the door tightly. He gritted his teeth and silently cried. A woman's voice seemed to fall into his ears. It had a rare gentleness. Beautiful clothes like a hero's, rotten clothes like a bright star. From now on, you will be called Ah Zhao. One day, our Ah Zhao will be like Almighty Yun, wearing beautiful clothes, looking beautiful and brilliant. As for the character, let's call you Xylan. Orchid is beautiful and fragrant. Mother, I used to love orchids the most. He innocently said, in the future, Ah Zhao will buy many, many orchids for Mother. The woman's laughter gradually faded away. His eyes fell on the flower basket in front of him. The fire was slightly hot. Chu Zhao paused for a moment, then threw the flower basket on the table into the fire. The flame licked the basket. After a while, the syrup flowed everywhere, giving off a burnt sweetness. He walked away expressionlessly. Chapter 150. The next morning, He Yin and Xiao Ju had an early breakfast and went to Jiang City's martial arts practice field to see the Jiang City's army. Lin Shuanghe didn't follow them and rested in the Chui mansion. Lu Buang continued to track down the whereabouts of those Yudo and went out at the same time as He Yin and Xiao Ju. There were many rivers in Jiang City, and the city was built on the water. The water cut the flat land into several large and small pieces, so it wasn't easy to find large open spaces. The martial arts practice field was built close to the prince's mansion for no other reason than that there was a large open space here. When He Yin and Xiao Ju went over, they met Chui Yuezhi. When Chui Yuezhi saw the two of them, he smiled and cupped his hands. Military Governor Xiao. As if he could see He Yan's surprise, Chui Yuezhi patted Xiao Ju's shoulder with a smile. Actually, I started to suspect you the second day you came to Jiang. Even my concubine could tell that you really don't look like anyone from the Chui family at all. How could you be my eldest brother's son? It's just that when I brought you into the prince's mansion, His Highness often called you in, so he must have known your identities long ago. Since His Highness's plans, I can only pretend to be stupid and not say anything. This Chui Yuezhi was quite smart. He chuckled, but there was a shrewd look in his eyes on his simple and honest face. If His Highness thinks I'm stupid, then I'll be stupid. There's nothing wrong with being stupid. He Yin understood that Chui Yuezhi could become Mu Hongjin's confidant not only because he was brave, but also because he was Qing Mei's childhood sweetheart. It was because he was stupid at the right time. With such a simple and honest subordinate, of course, she had to trust him and put him in an important position. He was a very wise person. Chui Yuezhi looked at Xiao Ju again. His Highness told me that all the Jiang City's army will listen to Military Governor Zhao's command from today onwards. His expression became serious. His Highness has already told me about the Yudo. I will do my best to cooperate with Military Governor Xiao. The citizens of Jiang City are still under the protection of Military Governor Xiao. Has Your Highness already begun to move the citizens of the city? He Yin asked. From today onwards, it's just that. Chui Yuezhi sighed. It won't be easy. The citizens of the city were used to living here peacefully. When they received news that Jiang was in trouble and had to evacuate the city, they naturally panicked. The younger ones were still fine. Those who were sick, old, and had no one to take care of them could not leave. How could those who owned businesses and shops in the city be at ease to leave everything behind? However, Cui Yuezhi perked up. I've always heard that General Feng Yun is invincible on the battlefield. This Cui has long wanted to meet her. I didn't expect military Governor Xiao to be so young and handsome. He was half envious and half amazed. How can there be such a person favored by the heavens in this world? This kind of experience of favoritism was probably something that ordinary people couldn't bear. As he spoke, he had already walked to the side of the training field. As Jiang City was close to the water and had not fought a war for many years, the soldiers did not have armor. They only wore cloth armor. The cloth armor was green, and each of them held a long spear. It was probably because they did a lot of manual labor that they all looked mighty and powerful. However, Yin could tell at a glance that their military formation was not lethal. It was like a decorative frame, and it was a somewhat old-fashioned decorative frame. All these years, Mu Hongjin probably didn't spend much effort on the training of the city's army. However, this was understandable. Ever since King Mengji's generation, Jiang had been at peace with Luan. Not to mention fighting wars, they were even good at stealing and swindling in the city. The people were simple and honest, so there was no need to spend much effort on this. Be prepared for danger in times of peace. Yin shook his head. Jiang's city army has been slacking off for too long. Cui Yuezhi looked at Yin. He had already found out from Mu Hongjin that Yin was Xiao Ju's subordinate. However, he thought that the subordinate was Xiao Ju's servant, a delicate wife that was prepared to fit the identity of Xiao Huanqing better during this trip to Jiang. Although he was puzzled midway and thought that this servant's relationship with Xiao Ju was a little too casual, he was curious when he heard Yan's words. Yin, do you see anything? Cui Zhongqi, my surname is He, and my name is Yin. I can't see anything else, but I feel that the military formation of Jiang City's city army is a little old-fashioned. In Shuajing, we stopped fighting like this a few years ago. Miss Yin, Cui Yuezhi puffed out his chest and said disapprovingly, when setting up a military formation, it doesn't mean that the newer the better. It also depends on whether it's suitable for use or not. This military formation is something that I came up with after discussing with my colleagues in the army. It's very suitable for Jiang's terrain. How can you say that it's old-fashioned? He did not dare to boast that he was better than Xiao Ju, but he was still better than Xiao Ju's subordinates. A good military formation could only be created after many years. Ian was not talking about a new dish, who would be able to change it every few days just for the sake of freshness. Ian saw that the military formation was full of loopholes, so she did not want to criticize him. She glanced at Xiao Ju again. Seeing that Xiao Ju did not say anything, she did not have any intention of objecting. She thought for a while and said tactfully, "Let's not talk about the military formation. Just based on the movements of the city army, it looks more like they're practicing. I'm afraid that they're lacking something on the battlefield." "What are they lacking?" Cui Yuezhi asked. "Dauntless." Yin said, "These city army soldiers can only deal with soldiers who are weaker than them or soldiers who are on par with them. If there are soldiers who are more ferocious and brutal than them," Yin shook her head, "I'm afraid that they won't be able to win." As they spoke, they had already walked to the front of the training field. Yan's words fell into the ears of the soldiers at the front. The young man standing at the front was holding a long spear and thrusting it forward. When he heard what Yin said, he could not help but glance at her. When Cui Yuezhi heard Yin say that about his soldiers, he was a little unconvinced. "Miss Yin, you make it sound like the Jiang army is made of tofu." Yin was not lying. This batch of Jiang City army soldiers had probably not been to a real battlefield. They were even weaker than the new recruits of the Liang Province Guards. After living a peaceful life for a long time, even a tiger's claws would lose their strength. Moreover, Yudo came prepared. They would not be as weak as a lamb. "I'm just a little worried," Yin said. "Miss," suddenly someone spoke. Yin turned her head to look. The one who spoke was the young man who held a spear and stood at the head of the group. His skin had been tanned by the sun, and his appearance was very handsome. He didn't fear Xiao Ju, who was standing at the side at all. He looked at He Yin and coldly said, "What do you mean by saying that our city's army is worthless? Although Jiang City has been peaceful for many years, the city army has been training hard every day. They don't dare to slack off for even a day. Miss, you haven't been there yet, so it's better not to jump to conclusions so easily." He Yin said, "I'm not jumping to conclusions so easily." The young man did not know He Yin, nor did he know Xiao Ju's identity. He thought that Cui Yuezhi had brought his nephew and niece-in-law here to observe the soldiers. He was probably young and did not know how to hide his emotions. He also felt a little indignant, so he said to He Yin, "How can a woman understand the affairs of men in the armies?" He Yin was speechless. He Yin thought to himself, if this woman really gets angry, even 10 men in the army won't be enough to fight her. If Jiang City's army faced Yudo with such arrogance, there was no way they could win this war. She was thinking about how to tactfully destroy this person's momentum when she suddenly heard Xiao Ju's voice. If that's the case, you can compete with her. He Yin looked at Xiao Ju. The soldier who spoke was also a little surprised. He did not expect him to make such a lousy suggestion. "This isn't good, right?" He Yin said hesitantly. The soldier felt a little comforted. He thought that this woman was tactful. Before he could say anything else, he heard He Yin's remaining words, "You're still Cui Zhongqi's soldiers. What if you destroy his morale and he can't recover in the future?" Cui Yuezhi was speechless. He was also thinking that Xiao Ju's suggestion was too hasty. Now that he heard He Yin's words, he really didn't know what to say. Cui Yuezhi was also a martial arts practitioner, but he couldn't directly touch He Yin's bone structure. Just from his appearance, He Yin was thin and weak, and he couldn't see anything powerful about him. Xiao Ju said that this girl should know some martial arts. However, compared to Mu Yi, she might be too arrogant. Looking at her thin arms and legs, Mu Yi could easily break her arms. He Yin looked at Xiao Ju. Under the morning light of the martial arts arena, the young man's figure was like jade. The black python on his dark blue robe was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, adding to his heroic spirit. The arrow sleeves were convenient for holding weapons. Here, he was no longer the second son of the Xiao family. He was the commander-in-chief of the Right Army, General Feng Yun. Mu Yi, the soldier, didn't say anything. He Yin looked at him and smiled. "What do you think? Little brother, do you want to fight with me?" She was still wearing the red riding uniform of the women of Jiang and black boots. The whip hanging in front of her chest was delicate and cute. She looked lively and harmless. She was no different from the countless young ladies in Jiang who pick flowers and sniff them in the spring. Most young men always had a competitive spirit. If a girl provoked them verbally, and a pretty girl at that, they would always want to prove themselves. Mu Yi was the same. He thought that he had already given this girl a chance, but she didn't want to give up. He had no choice but to let her have a taste of the power of the Jiang army. Thinking of this, Mu Yi cupped his hands and said, "Excuse me." He Yin faintly smiled. She flipped over and leaped up, stepping onto the wooden stake beside her. The bystanders only saw a red swallow. In the blink of an eye, it had already landed on the empty space in the center of the martial arts field. She slowly pulled out the purple jade whip from her waist and made a please gesture. The layman watched for the excitement, while the expert watched for the skill. Her appearance was already unusual. Mu Yi was slightly surprised, but he didn't want to be outdone. He followed her and stood in front of He Yin. One man, one spear, one woman, and one whip. In the blink of an eye, they were entangled in a fight. The surrounding Jiang soldiers had already put down their spears and were staring at them intently. Each army had its own characteristics. For example, the South Mansion soldiers were orderly and serious. The Liangzhou guards were free and straightforward, and the Jiang soldiers were lively and lively. It was as if they were watching a show. They immediately became excited. Good fight. Mu Yi, why can't you do it? Don't go easy on her. Good job, Mississippi beat this brat to death. For a moment, the cheers were endless. Cui Yuezhi stared at the red figure in the middle of the fight. The whip in her hand was like moving clouds and flowing water, winding like lightning. He was extremely surprised. Mu Yi was one of the most outstanding soldiers in the Jiang army. Not to mention how good he was in the army, he was considered one of the best among the people here. However, even Mu Yi was at a disadvantage when facing He Yin. Others thought that Mu Yi was holding back because his opponent was a girl. However, Cui Yueji's eyes were sharp. He could tell at a glance that Mu Yi didn't stand a chance. The girl's whip was too fast, and her footwork was too fast. Mu Yi didn't have a chance to attack. If this continued, he would soon be defeated. Cui Yueji couldn't help but ask Xiao Ju, Military Governor Xiao, is Miss He really your subordinate? He couldn't find a single subordinate like her in the Jiang army. It really made people jealous. It's not unfair for your subordinate to lose to the number 1 Liangzhou guard, Xiao Ju said calmly. Number 1 Liangzhou guard? Cui Yueji didn't understand, but He Yin was a girl. Could it be that she had fought with the Liangzhou guard before? On the stage, Mu Yi was in a sorry state. Beads of sweat gradually seeped out of his forehead. The girl looked delicate, but her movements were swift and unparalleled. She predicted every move he made. Her movements were also fast, as if she didn't know fatigue. Most importantly, how could a girl have such great strength? With a crack, the whip struck the stone pile beside him. A corner of the stone pile was broken, and the flying gravel brushed past Mu Yi's face. Mu Yi couldn't believe his eyes. That was a stone pile. Normally, even a sword might not be able to break it, but she used a whip. Not only did the whip not break, but He Yin also looked relaxed. What kind of logic was this? Mu Yi naturally didn't know that when He Yin was in the Liangzhou guard, the number of days she threw stone locks was counted in months. He Yin wasn't targeting anyone. In terms of strength, no one present was a match for her. While Mu Yi was thinking, a long whip was already in front of him. He was so shocked that he immediately used the spear in his hand to block it. There was a crack in the air, and the spear actually broke into 2 pieces. The surrounding Jiang army quieted down. They could only hear the girls' laughter echoing in the field. The last 3 strikes. The first strike told you not to look down on girls. Mu Yi was flustered. He grabbed the long broken spear and continued to block. Crack! There was another crack. The broken spear in his hand broke into pieces again. The strong girl tilted her head and sighed. The second strike is arrogant and conceited. It's a big taboo in battle. Mu Yi only had a spear head less than the length of a palm in his hand. He was defenseless for a moment. The third strike was already in front of him, and he couldn't dodge it. The third strike, don't be afraid. I won't hurt you. When the long whip rushed in front of him, it mischievously curled up and landed in his hand, taking away the spear head in his hand. When Mu Yi came back to his senses, the girl in the red dress was already playing with his iron spear head. She walked over and patted his shoulder, returning the spear head to him. She smiled and said, "There's always someone better than you. Young man, you have to continue to work hard." She walked past Mu Yi and left with a smile. His companions crowded around him and asked, "It can't be, right? Brother Mu, aren't you losing too quickly? Did you deliberately show mercy? How can you be so unambitious?" "Don't talk nonsense." Mu Yi was angry. "I didn't show mercy." His companions looked at each other. Someone said, "Didn't show mercy? Is she really that powerful?" "That's impossible." Another person pointed at his face and said, "Mu Yi, why is your face red?" The noise in the distance fell into his ears, but Cui Yueji wasn't in the mood to teach them a lesson. He only sighed. How fast time passed. It hadn't even been half an hour. He defeated the most outstanding person in the Jiang army, just like that. Cui Yueji could clearly see that He Yin didn't use her full strength. Otherwise, if her whip wasn't aimed at Mu Yi's spear, but at Mu Yi himself, Mu Yi would have suffered a lot. Military Governor Xiao has a good subordinate, Cui Yueji said sincerely. When he thought of what he said just now, he was a little worried. The Jiang army is not as good as the Liangzhou guards, but the Liangzhou guards have already fought with the Yudo once. He Yin happened to walk over and said, "The Yudo's savagery and cunning are beyond Cui Zhongqi's imagination." They definitely won't be as merciful as I was just now. If the Jiang army can't win, it will be a disaster for the people in the city. Cui Yuezhi shuddered. The most important problem isn't the city guards, Xiao Ju said. Then what is it? Jiang has a lot of water. The Yudo can only attack with water. This battle is destined to be fought on water. The reason why your army formation is outdated is because it isn't used for water attacks. Cui Yuezhi frowned. Can you be more specific, Commander-in-Chief? Ian looked at Xiao Ju. She was a little excited. She didn't expect Xiao Ju to have the same idea as her. The young man lowered his eyes. The boat. The most important thing was the boat. In the attic, the man looked away and smiled with his head lowered. Ing Xiang said softly, I didn't expect Missy to be so skilled. Although she already knew that He Yin was one of the best in the Liangzhou guards, she had never seen it with her own eyes. It was hard to imagine that the girl who fought with others in the training field was more dazzling than when she stood quietly as a woman. Although they were both beauties, Ing Xiang felt that He Yan's beauty was especially special among all the women in the world. However, because of this uniqueness, there weren't as many people who admired her as there were people who admired the beauty of the secular world. Fourth young master, Ing Xiang said, Princess Mengji has started to evacuate the citizens in the city today. Do you want to go with her? Teacher sent me to Jiang to keep an eye on Xiao Huijin. Since Xiao Huijin is here, how can I evacuate by myself? Chu Zhao's gaze fell on He Yin, who seemed to be talking to Xiao Ju in the distance. He smiled faintly. If military governor Xiao stays in Jiang, he can protect himself even if the Yudo comes. However, young master doesn't know martial arts. It will be dangerous for you to stay in the city. Ing Xiang wanted to persuade him again. The more dangerous it is, the more it proves my loyalty to teacher. Chu Zhao smiled carelessly. Ing Xiang, don't you understand? Teacher gave me two options when he assigned this task to me. One option is to die here. The other option is to live and complete the task and return to the capital. If I don't complete the task and return alive, I will still die. Do you understand? Ing Xiang was silent for a moment, then said, I understand. You don't need to worry. Chu Zhao looked into the distance with his hands behind his back. Besides, I have a good friend who knows martial arts. Since she is so righteous and naive, I think she will protect my safety. Ing Xiang followed his gaze and looked at He Yin in the distance. She thought for a moment, then reminded him, Young master, Missy is military governor Zhao's subordinate. You also said that she is a subordinate. Chu Zhao smiled and said, There is no such thing as an unchanging relationship in the world. A loyal partner can become a terrifying enemy in the next moment. He had seen this kind of thing many times. People were fickle. In the prince's mansion, Mu Xiaolu jumped down the stone stairs with a box in her arms. She shouted, Grandmother! Mu Hongjin was sitting in the hall. When she heard her, she looked at her tiredly. What is it, Xiaolu? Aunt Tong told me to only take the important things, but I like everything. Mu Xiaolu said. Aunt Tong said that the carriage can't be put down. Grandmother, can you keep these for me first? When I return to Jiang, I will ask you for them. Mu Hongjin smiled and opened the box. There were some small toys in the box. There was a cricket made of wood, a spinning top, a small dog made of paper, and a whistle that would sing when blown. Most of them were things that Cui Yuezhi bought from the streets to please Mu Xiaolu. Some of them were things that Mu Xiaolu snatched from her peers who visited the mansion. These were also her treasures. Mu Hongjin closed the lid of the wooden box and handed it to the maid beside her. Okay, grandmother will keep them for me. When you return to Jiang, you can ask me for them. Mu Xiaolu nodded. Grandmother, you must take good care of them. Mu Hongjin laughed and tapped her forehead. I know, miser. Grandmother. Mu Xiaolu jumped onto the soft couch and hugged her waist. Why do I have to leave Jiang? I don't want to leave grandmother. Can I not attend Uncle Wang's birthday banquet? Nonsense. Mu Hongjin said. How can you not go? You're the future princess. Only you can represent Jiang. I don't want to go. The little girl acted shamelessly. How would I know what Uncle Wang looks like? How would I know if he is easy to get along with? What if he is very fierce? You won't. They will all treat you very well. Mu Hongjin patted her head. Her tone was gentle, but a little strict. Xiaolu, you are not a child anymore. Grandmother can't accompany you forever. One day, you will have to take charge of many things by yourself. Grandmother can only be at ease when I see you grow up. I have to grow up slowly. Mu Xiaolu was puzzled. I'm not a bamboo shoot at the mountain pass that will break through the soil overnight. Mu Hongjin was amused by her words. After laughing, her eyes were dyed with a layer of worry. There was no time. Yudo was hiding in the dark and had already made a move in the past few days. She had to send Mu Xiaolu out. Mu Xiaolu was the last hope of Jiang City. She had also prepared for the worst. It was a pity that she could not watch the little girl grow up and become her indestructible protection before she became an adult. But why were there so many regrets in the world? You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.